Excuse me, sir. You'll need to relocate. This seat has been reassigned to passengers who better represent our premium service. The cold voice of Chief Flight Attendant Veronica Palmer sliced through the air like a knife. The entire first-class cabin of Pinnacle Airways flight from Newark to Chicago fell into silence. Harsh white LED light illuminated the calm face of the man seated in 1A Alexander Brooks, 38 years old. Though no one knew this morning he was the CEO of the very airline they were flying on. He wore a plain white t-shirt, dark jeans, and worn sneakers. No ring, no luxury watch. Nothing about him suggested power except the quiet steadiness in his gaze. A familiar wave of heat rose from Alexander's chest to his neck. Not embarrassment, but a controlled anger he had learned to master decades ago. This was far from the first time he'd been judged by appearance rather than merit. An image flashed through his mind. His father, dressed in his best suit, being asked to move to the back of a restaurant despite having a reservation. "Keep your dignity, son," his father had whispered. "It's the one thing they can't take unless you let them." Veronica stood immaculately dressed in her perfectly pressed uniform, chin slightly raised. The scent of her expensive perfume overpowered even the new leather fragrance of the first-class seats. "There must be some mistake," Alexander said slowly, his voice calm and deep enough to make Veronica hesitate for a fraction of a second. "I checked in early this morning." But Veronica didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed glued to the tablet in her hand as if afraid to meet something she shouldn't see. "The system shows that you don't meet the qualifications for this seat, sir. Please move to seat 18C. A wave of murmurs spread across the cabin. Expensive suits rustled, newspapers lowered. Someone gave a low whistle. A white woman frowned, her expression tinged with disdain. Alexander remained still. He could reveal his identity immediately, and this humiliation with a simple badge or phone call. But something deeper held him back. If this was happening to him, the CEO, what was happening to passengers without his power? He glanced around and noticed Sofia Rodriguez, a young flight attendant, standing slightly behind Veronica, her face tense, her hands clasped tightly together. "I paid for a first-class ticket," Alexander said clearly, each word deliberate. "I have every right to sit here." Veronica snapped the tablet shut with a sharp click. "You have 30 seconds to vacate the seat, or I'll have to call security." Before Alexander could respond, the intercom crackled to life. "Boarding completed. Cabin crew prepare for departure." The plane door closed. Every eye in the cabin turned toward him. An older white man in the next row whispered, "What's going on?" Alexander drew a steady breath, his tone calm but firm. "If there's an error in the system, you should fix it, not throw a paying customer out of his seat." Veronica said nothing more. She pressed a button on the internal phone. "Captain Whitmore, I need you in first class. We have a passenger refusing to comply." Heavy footsteps echoed down the aisle. Captain Richard Whitmore appeared tall and broad-shouldered in his early 50s. His salt-and-pepper hair neatly combed his steel-blue eyes, cold and sharp. He looked Alexander over from head to toe the way someone might inspect an intruder who didn't belong. Sir Whitmore said curtly, "For the safety of this flight, I need your cooperation in moving to your reassigned seat. Flight safety." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "How does sitting in the seat I paid for threaten flight safety?" Whitmore avoided his gaze. "This directive comes from Mr. Sullivan, the Chief Operating Officer. There were certain adjustments made for higher-tier passengers." The name made Alexander tilt his head slightly. James Sullivan, the man he had entrusted with day-to-day operations for the past 6 months. Since when does the COO have authority to reassign passenger seating? Alexander asked quietly, but Whitmore only tightened his grip on his cap, his lips pressed into a thin line. Behind them, another passenger, an older Asian woman, was being told to leave her business class seat because of a data error. Alexander saw it and felt his stomach tighten a string of so-called mistakes, each one targeting those who didn't have the right color. Sir Whitmore repeated his tone hard as steel. "If you refuse to comply, we'll have no choice but to remove you from the aircraft. And as a reminder, the CEO has granted the operations team full authority to dismiss any disruptive personnel or passengers." A faint smile crossed Alexander's lips. The CEO. They were using his own power to threaten him. Sofia took a hesitant half-step forward, her voice trembling. "Captain, maybe we should review the reservation again. The system has been glitchy since the update." Silence. Sofia Veronica snapped, her voice cutting like ice. "Unless you'd like to join him in coach, remember what happened to Alicia when she questioned procedure." Sofia's face paled, but her eyes showed a flash of defiance before she lowered her gaze. The air grew thick and heavy. Alexander met Veronica's gaze. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then from across the aisle, a well-dressed white man in his mid-40s cleared his throat. "I believe that's my seat now. Thomas Blackwell. Blackwell Investments." He extended his boarding pass toward Veronica with a smug smile. "I was told at the gate that I'd been upgraded due to my status." Veronica's entire demeanor transformed, her face brightening with a practiced smile. "Of course, Mr. Blackwell. We're just resolving the situation." Alexander caught the subtle exchange of glances between Blackwell and Whitmore, recognition, perhaps even conspiracy. This wasn't a random incident. It was a practiced procedure. "Mr. Blackwell." Alexander addressed him directly. "Did they tell you why you were being upgraded?" Blackwell looked uncomfortable for a moment before recovering. "They said a premium client deserves premium placement. Now, if you don't mind." He gestured toward the seat. Alexander looked between them, taking in the performance. A decade of board meetings had taught him to recognize when to make a strategic retreat in service of a larger victory. "All right," he said evenly. "But I'll be documenting this." "Documenting?" Veronica sneered. "Suit yourself." Alexander stood lifting his small carry-on bag. His eyes passed over each face. Veronica Palmer, Captain Richard Whitmore, and the young attendant, Sofia Rodriguez, the only one who couldn't hide the shame in her eyes. As Alexander walked out of first class, whispers rose again. A few people pretended not to look, but their eyes followed him, filled with judgment. In row 3, Thomas Blackwell leaned back in Alexander's former seat and smirked. The aisle felt impossibly long, a walk of silent humiliation. Each step echoed with memories, his father being asked to move to the back of a restaurant, despite having a reservation, his mother being followed by security in high-end stores, his own college experiences of being mistaken for janitorial staff while studying late in the engineering lab. Different contexts, same message. You don't belong here. Alexander noticed 3 other passengers being reassigned as well, a young black man in a business suit, a Latino couple dressed in their Sunday best. All of them with their heads bowed, accepting what seemed inevitable. He stopped at row 18, the cramped economy cabin. The air smelled of reheated meals, the seats narrow, the noise constant. Only a few steps separated first class from economy, yet it felt like 2 different worlds. Veronica followed her heels, striking sharply against the floor. "Here's your seat 18C, she said coldly. "A place more fitting for someone like you." The words hung in the air, their implication unmistakable. Not just about seating, but about worth, about belonging, about humanity itself. Alexander looked at her, his voice calm but heavy as stone. "I'll remember this. Every face, every word." "Is that a threat?" Veronica lifted her chin. "No," he said softly, eyes never leaving hers. "It's a promise." She scoffed and turned away. Alexander raised his phone. The camera was already recording. When Veronica reached to grab it, he stepped back. "Careful, Ms. Palmer," he warned quietly. "Attempting to seize a passenger's personal property constitutes assault." Her face paled before she snapped back coldly. "Recording crew members without consent is a federal violation." Alexander looked up at her, voice steady. "And discriminating against someone because of their skin color is a human rights violation. Which one do you think is worse?" The plane trembled slightly as the engines roared to life. It was 7:00 in the morning and the cabin doors were sealed. No one could enter or leave now. Alexander sat down in seat 18C between two passengers, avoiding eye contact. His heart pounded not with anger, but with resolve. He looked up at the metallic ceiling light gleaming across its surface and whispered to himself, "Fine. If they think I'm just another ordinary black passenger, they're about to learn a lesson they'll never forget." A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, merging with the deep rumble of the engines. The wings tilted, lifting the aircraft into the sky. In that moment, humiliation turned to fire, and Alexander Brooks knew this flight would change everything. The engines roared steadily as the Pinnacle Airbus sliced through the clouds. Morning light slashed through the windows like thin blades. In economy, Alexander sat motionless in seat 18C, not out of helplessness, but calculation. He was no longer a humiliated passenger. He was the owner watching his company crack from within its own walls of steel and glass. His journey to founding Pinnacle Airways had begun 20 years earlier, when as an 18-year-old college freshman, he'd been bumped from a flight, despite having a confirmed reservation. The gate agent had given his seat to a late-arriving businessman, claiming Alexander's ticket had been flagged for verification. He had missed his grandmother's funeral. That day, Alexander had made a promise to himself. One day he would build an airline where dignity wasn't determined by appearance. Through college business school and 15 years of relentless work, he had transformed a regional charter service into Pinnacle Airways, now the 5th largest carrier in the country. 6 months ago, he had stepped back from day-to-day operations to focus on expanding the airline's philanthropic initiatives in Africa. James Sullivan, his COO for 3 years, had assumed operational control. Alexander had trusted him completely. A memory surfaced Sullivan at a board meeting 3 years earlier, arguing against expanded service to predominantly black neighborhoods. "The demographic doesn't align with our premium strategy," he had said. Alexander had challenged him then, but perhaps not firmly enough. Had he missed earlier signs of Sullivan's true perspectives? Now, as the seatbelt sign turned off with a soft ding, Alexander pulled out his phone again. Strangely, the signal hadn't dropped. He opened his encrypted company access portal and began reviewing passenger manifests. The pattern emerged immediately. Over the past 4 months, there had been a 78% increase in seat reassignments. When he cross-referenced passenger photos from ID scans, the correlation was undeniable. Nearly all reassignments involved passengers of color being moved to accommodate white passengers. Alexander's jaw tightened. He composed a secure message to his chief of staff, Mia Hernandez. "Mia, I'm on flight 673. There's an organized discrimination scheme happening. Sullivan appears involved. I need full access to all operational records for the past 6 months and our emergency protocols ready. Don't alert anyone else yet." The response came almost instantly. "On it." "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. But Pinnacle isn't. And that's about to change." He attempted to access the company server again, but found his credentials suddenly invalid. Sullivan was already moving to block him, a digital coup underway, even as the physical humiliation played out. Alexander tried 3 backup access routes, all blocked. Finally, he activated the emergency override system, a failsafe he had insisted on installing, despite Sullivan's objections that it was unnecessarily paranoid. Implementing Protocol 27, he typed to Mia. "Full executive override." "System fighting back," Mia replied. "Sullivan's team is actively blocking access. They've changed security protocols." Alexander felt a surge of focused anger. This wasn't just discrimination, it was a calculated takeover attempt. Sullivan had likely planned to sideline him completely during the African initiative, gradually consolidating power. As he continued digging through the company database, a shadow fell across his screen. Sofia Rodriguez stood in the aisle beside him, pretending to check overhead bins while sliding a folded napkin onto his tray. "I'm sorry," she whispered, then continued down the aisle. Alexander unfolded the napkin. Inside was a handwritten note. "This has been happening for months." It started with unofficial suggestions from Sullivan and became policy 6 weeks ago. "Most of us are afraid to speak up. Some of us are documenting everything. I can help. 3 others with me. Network access code Dignity 1723. He looked up, catching Sofia's eye as she worked several rows ahead. She gave an almost imperceptible nod. Alexander entered the access code into a hidden terminal on his company portal. Suddenly, a flood of information appeared, hundreds of documented incidents, recordings, screenshots of internal communications. Sofia and her allies had been building a case for months. An internal memo from Sullivan to senior flight staff stood out. "Our premium experience enhancement requires difficult decisions. Research shows premium travelers' comfort decreases when surrounded by passengers who don't reflect their demographic profile. While we cannot explicitly use racial criteria, the guidelines provided should help you make appropriate judgment calls during high-capacity flights. Remember, these adjustments are never recorded as race-based, always cite system flags or verification issues." Alexander's resolve hardened. This wasn't just an isolated incident. This was institutionalized discrimination hiding behind corporate marketing jargon and a direct violation of everything Pinnacle was built to be. "Mia," he typed, "Protocol 27 confirmed. Override all security blocks. Lock Sullivan out of all systems immediately. Prepare for emergency board meeting upon landing." "Working on it," Mia replied. Sullivan's team fighting back hard. They've triggered security countermeasures claiming unauthorized access. This was becoming a full-scale corporate war fought in digital space while Alexander sat in a cramped economy seat. He needed allies' evidence and a bulletproof plan before landing. He leaned back in the cramped economy seat, no longer feeling its discomfort. In his mind, he was already rebuilding his airline from the inside out. Every slight, every dismissal, every humiliation he had experienced throughout his life crystallized into this moment of purpose. He looked out the window at the vast blue sky. Pinnacle Airways had been his life's work, his attempt to create something better than what came before. He had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams financially, but somewhere along the way, the soul of his company had been corrupted. Alexander Brooks closed his eyes, not in defeat, but in focus. In 35 minutes, he would reclaim not just his seat, but the very heart of Pinnacle Airways. At 30,000 feet, Alexander's investigation deepened. With Mia's remote assistance, he accessed the complete archive of crew communications and training materials. What he found made his blood run cold. Sullivan's Premium Experience Enhancement Initiative included a scoring system called Cabin Composition Analytics. Passengers were assigned hidden ratings based on appearance, dress, speech patterns, and name origins. Flight attendants received bonuses for optimal demographic balancing in premium cabins. Even more disturbing was the language in Sullivan's presentations to investors. "We've enhanced the premium passenger experience by ensuring our high-value customers feel comfortable among their peers," one slide read. Another boasted about curating a first-class environment that reflects our target market's natural social preferences. Alexander accessed Sullivan's personal corporate drive, discovering a folder labeled Market Reality that required additional security clearance. Inside was a document that shook him to his core. Sullivan's private manifesto on airline economics. Premium travel is aspirational by definition. The unspoken truth of luxury is exclusivity, not just from financial constraints, but from social discomfort. Our research confirms what we already know: high-value customers pay for separation, not just from crowding, but from people they perceive as unlike themselves. While we cannot explicitly acknowledge this driver, we can quietly engineer it. Accompanying the document were benchmark analyses of country clubs, exclusive resorts, and luxury brands that had maintained demographic consistency while avoiding discrimination lawsuits, a playbook for systematic exclusion disguised as premium experience. Most disturbing was a section titled Brooks Risk Management, a specific strategy to gradually distance Alexander from operational decisions by emphasizing philanthropic initiatives better aligned with his personal interests and background. Alexander fought to maintain his composure. Sullivan hadn't just betrayed company principles, he had planned to systematically remove its founder using the very prejudice Pinnacle had been created to combat. He forwarded key documents to Mia with instructions: secure these for legal. Sullivan planned this for years. His phone vibrated with an incoming message from an unknown number. "Mr. Brooks, this is Dr. Elijah Taylor in 22A. We've never met, but I recognized you when you boarded. I'm a professor of business ethics at Northwestern and a Pinnacle Platinum member for 15 years. What I witnessed today isn't isolated. I've documented 17 similar incidents across various airlines. Would like to speak when appropriate." Alexander sent a brief reply. "Thank you, Dr. Taylor. We'll connect after landing." Another notification appeared, a message from Sullivan to Captain Whitmore, sent just minutes ago. "Richard, is the situation contained? Several board members are on the New York flight this morning. We can't afford any disruptions to the program before the quarterly presentation. Ensure Palmer maintains appropriate cabin composition." Whitmore's reply came quickly. "Handled. The passenger is contained in economy. No issues expected." Alexander's jaw clenched. Contained. Like a threat. Like a disease. His phone pinged again with a message from Mia. Found something big. Sullivan has been running 2 sets of customer satisfaction metrics. Public numbers show overall satisfaction up 3%. Internal numbers show minority passenger satisfaction down 24%. He's been hiding the data. The pieces were falling into place. Sullivan wasn't just accommodating prejudice, he was weaponizing it for short-term financial gain, sacrificing the company's long-term integrity and exposing it to massive legal liability. Mia, who authorized this program, Alexander typed. "That's the thing," she replied. "There's no formal authorization." Sullivan implemented it as a marketing test that never went through normal approval channels. He's been reporting the revenue increases to the board without disclosing the methodology. Alexander dug deeper into Sullivan's background, something he realized he should have done years ago. A disturbing pattern emerged. Sullivan had been fired from 2 previous airlines for undisclosed policy disagreements. Further research revealed confidential settlements with employee discrimination claims at both companies shortly after his departures. This wasn't a momentary lapse or recent development. This was who James Sullivan had always been. Alexander had missed it, blinded by Sullivan's operational brilliance and their seemingly shared vision for Pinnacle. The realization was painful. As CEO, Alexander had created the environment where this could happen, where Sullivan could implement discriminatory policies while the founder focused elsewhere. His own absence from day-to-day operations had created the vacuum Sullivan exploited. The plan crystallized in Alexander's mind. This wasn't just about reclaiming his seat or even punishing individual bad actors. This was about excising a cancer that threatened to destroy everything Pinnacle Airways stood for and acknowledging his own role in allowing it to grow. Sofia Rodriguez appeared beside Alexander's seat again, this time openly. "Beverage service, sir?" she asked loudly enough for others to hear, but her eyes conveyed a different message. "Just water, thank you," he replied. As she poured the water, she whispered, "4 of us have been documenting everything. We have recordings, screenshots, passenger complaints that were buried. Sullivan's people threatened our jobs if we spoke up." "Why risk helping me?" Alexander asked quietly. Sofia's hands trembled slightly as she handed him the cup. "My parents crossed the border with nothing but their dignity. My father was an aerospace engineer in Guatemala, but here he cleaned office buildings because his credentials weren't recognized." She glanced around quickly. "When I was hired at Pinnacle, he cried. He said, 'Now a Rodriguez will fly planes instead of just cleaning them.' I promised him I'd never compromise that dignity for a paycheck." Her voice caught. "2 months ago, I refused to move an elderly black woman from first class. Veronica wrote me up for insubordination and cut my hours. 3 others have been fired for similar violations. We call ourselves the Dignity Crew." Alexander nodded. "Connect me." Minutes later, his phone displayed a secure group chat with 4 flight attendants. Their messages poured in. "I've been keeping records of every reassignment for 3 months. Miguel. They made us attend customer comfort training, where they taught us to seat like with like without explicitly mentioning race. Zoe. I have recordings of Veronica telling us to use our judgment about who belongs in first class. Diane." Sofia added, "This is Alexander Brooks. He's the CEO." The chat exploded with shock, then relief, then determination. "We've been trying to reach corporate ethics for months. They blocked all our reports. Sullivan's team controls all communication channels." Alexander typed quickly, "Keep performing your duties normally. Document everything. I'll handle the rest. You have my word that your jobs are protected." He closed the chat as he noticed Dr. Taylor making his way down the aisle toward the lavatory. As the older man passed, he discreetly dropped a thumb drive onto Alexander's tray. "Statistical analysis of seating patterns across 6 airlines," Dr. Taylor murmured without stopping. "Pinnacle's discrimination trend began 4 months ago. The data's irrefutable." Alexander pocketed the drive just as the beverage cart reached his row from the other direction. Veronica Palmer stood behind it, her eyes narrowing when she saw him. "Economy passengers are limited to 1 beverage," she stated coldly, noticing his water cup. "I understand," Alexander replied evenly. "And no electronic devices during service," she added, gesturing to his phone. Alexander met her gaze. "Is that a policy for all passengers or just ones who look like me?" Veronica's nostrils flared. "You're being disruptive. This is your final warning." From across the aisle, an elderly white woman spoke up. "He hasn't done anything wrong. You're the one being disruptive, young lady." Veronica's face flushed. She pushed the cart forward without responding. The woman leaned toward Alexander. "I saw what happened earlier. Disgraceful. I've been flying since the 1960s, and some things never seem to change." "Thank you," Alexander said quietly. "Don't thank me. I should have said something earlier." She extended her hand. "Martha Williams." Alexander shook it, touched by this small act of solidarity. His phone vibrated again. Mia had sent the executive override codes for the plane's communication system. In case of emergency, the CEO could address the entire aircraft, directly bypassing the flight crew. Alexander checked his watch. 20 minutes until he would make his move. Everything was in place. The evidence was overwhelming. The allies were positioned. His phone pinged with an urgent alert from Mia. Emergency Sullivan attempting to convene emergency board meeting citing CEO incapacitation. Claims you've had mental health episode. Trying to invoke succession protocol. Alexander's heart raced. Sullivan was moving faster than anticipated, attempting a corporate coup, while Alexander was literally contained at 30,000 feet. "Delay him," Alexander typed back. "Use any means necessary. I need 20 more minutes." "Fighting back," Mia replied. "But he's gathered 4 board members already. Claims to have medical documentation." Alexander's mind raced. Sullivan had planned this meticulously, using Alexander's focus on the African initiative as cover to position himself as the responsible executive while portraying Alexander as increasingly detached and unstable. The stakes had just risen dramatically. This wasn't just about discrimination. It was an existential fight for control of Pinnacle Airways itself. As he surveyed the cabin, watching Veronica and her crew provide visibly different levels of service to different passengers, a cold realization settled over him. This moment wasn't just about Pinnacle Airways. It represented something much larger. The countless invisible barriers, the daily indignities, the persistent myth that belonging was tied to appearance. He thought of his father, who had worked 2 jobs to send him to college, and who had always been seated at the back of planes despite wearing his best suit. He thought of his mentor, who had built a successful technology company, but was still regularly mistaken for the janitor in his own building. Alexander's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about corporate policy. This was about human dignity. And in 20 minutes, he would reclaim both. The flight reached its cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dimming with a soft chime. The cabin atmosphere shifted to the practiced routine of mid-flight service. In first class, Veronica personally served Thomas Blackwell a mimosa in a real glass. "Anything else I can get for you, Mr. Blackwell?" she asked, her voice honeyed with deference. "This is more like it," Blackwell replied loudly, intentionally, glancing toward economy. "It's nice when people understand the natural order of things." Several first-class passengers chuckled. Others looked uncomfortable but remained silent. In economy, the contrast was stark. Flight attendants rushed through service, barely making eye contact. When the Latino couple who had been downgraded requested blankets, they were told supplies were limited. Moments later, a white passenger made the same request and immediately received 2 blankets. Alexander observed it all, recording discreetly. The discrimination wasn't even subtle. It was performed with confident impunity, as if the curtain between cabins somehow concealed the reality of what was happening. His phone vibrated. Mia, again Sullivan, moving faster. "Claims you've exhibited erratic behavior and concerning decisions. 3 board members now backing his emergency succession motion. We need you to act now." Sullivan had accelerated his timeline. The coup was happening in real time. The intercom crackled as Captain Whitmore's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude of 30,000 feet. Weather in Chicago looks clear, and we anticipate an on-time arrival. At this time, I'd like to personally welcome our premium passengers in first class. Your support of Pinnacle Airways is especially appreciated." The message was clear in its exclusion. Alexander noticed several economy passengers exchange knowing glances. Sofia passed by with the beverage cart, giving Alexander an almost imperceptible nod. The Dignity crew was still gathering evidence. In first class, Blackwell had become increasingly loud, emboldened by his 3rd mimosa. "You know," he announced to anyone who would listen, "some people simply don't understand their place. Airlines used to know how to maintain standards." Veronica nodded sympathetically. "It's challenging sometimes, Mr. Blackwell, but we do our best to create an appropriate environment for our valued customers." "Well, I appreciate it," Blackwell continued. "I pay extra not to be surrounded by certain elements." He glanced meaningfully toward economy. A young white woman in first class frowned. "That's a horrible thing to say." Blackwell waved dismissively. "I'm just saying what everyone thinks. Why else would we pay for first class?" Captain Whitmore emerged from the cockpit, moving through first class and checking on select passengers. He stopped to chat with Blackwell, both men laughing comfortably. Their camaraderie was evident, the easy fellowship of those who have never questioned their belonging. Alexander's phone lit up with a message from Sullivan to Whitmore board meeting proceeding. "Brooks will be removed from operational authority by landing. Maintain current protocols and prepare for smooth transition. Your loyalty will be remembered." That was it. the final confirmation that this wasn't a rogue operation, but a deliberate coup. Alexander's phone buzzed again, an emergency alert from MIA critical board vote in 15 minutes. 4 members aligned with Sullivan. We're fighting but losing ground. They're citing protection of shareholder value and operational stability. Alexander checked his watch. 5 more minutes. He sent a final message to MIA Execute Protocol 27 now. Full authority transfer. Lock Sullivan out of all systems. Alert legal team to prepare for immediate action. Broadcast record of discrimination to all board members immediately. Done, came the reply seconds later. You have complete control. Board meeting disrupted by evidence presentation. Sullivan furious but contained. Good luck. Alexander stood straightening his t-shirt. Sofia caught his eye from the galley, giving him a subtle thumbs up. The 4 members of the Dignity crew moved into position throughout the aircraft, phones ready to record. Martha Williams, the elderly passenger, touched his arm as he prepared to move. Give 'em hell, young man. Alexander smiled. I intend to. With calm, measured steps, he began walking toward the front of the aircraft. Each step felt significant, as if he were crossing more than just the physical distance between economy and first class. A flight attendant moved to intercept him near the curtain dividing the cabins. Sir, please return to your seat. Movement between cabins is restricted. Alexander continued forward without acknowledging her. As he passed through the curtain, conversations in first class halted abruptly. Thomas Blackwell's face contorted in indignation. Captain Whitmore, who had emerged from the cockpit to socialize with preferred passengers, turned with a scowl. This was it. The moment of revelation. The moment of truth. Alexander walked deliberately toward the front of the plane, his steps measured and calm. A flight attendant moved to intercept him near the curtain dividing economy from first class. Sir, please return to your seat. The seatbelt sign may illuminate at any time. Alexander continued forward without acknowledging her. As he passed through the curtain, the atmosphere in first class shifted immediately. Conversations paused. Glasses stopped mid-lift. Thomas Blackwell's face contorted in indignation. Veronica Palmer emerged from the galley, her expression thunderous. Excuse me, you are not authorized to be in this cabin. Return to your assigned seat immediately. Alexander kept walking until he reached the center of first class. He turned slowly, making eye contact with each passenger in turn. Captain Whitmore appeared from the cockpit, his face flushed with anger. Sir, this is a security violation. Return to your seat now or we'll be forced to restrain you for the remainder of the flight. Alexander remained motionless, his calm presence creating a center of gravity in the tense cabin. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly through the silence. My name is Alexander Brooks. He reached into his pocket and removed a small black card embossed with the gold Pinnacle Airways logo. He held it up for all to see. I am the founder and CEO of Pinnacle Airways. I own 67% of this airline's shares. I designed this aircraft's interior. I personally approved the leather on these seats. The silence deepened, punctuated only by a sharp intake of breath from Veronica. Captain Whitmore's face drained of color, his authoritative posture crumbling. That's impossible, he stammered. Sullivan assured us, James Sullivan. Alexander cut him off, has been attempting a corporate coup while implementing discriminatory policies that violate federal law, company values, and basic human dignity. Alexander moved to the center of the aisle, addressing the entire cabin. I boarded this flight as an anonymous passenger to experience our service firsthand. Within minutes, I was removed from my rightful seat because I didn't look like someone who belonged in first class. He gestured toward Thomas Blackwell. Meanwhile, Mr. Blackwell was upgraded because he better represented our premium demographic. Blackwell sank lower in his seat, his earlier bravado evaporating. What you are witnessing, Alexander continued, is the exposure of a discriminatory seating policy that has been implemented without my knowledge or approval. For the past 4 months, Pinnacle Airways has been systematically removing passengers of color from premium cabins to create what one executive called a more comfortable demographic environment. Gasps and murmurs spread throughout the cabin. Passengers began looking around, suddenly aware of the cabin's composition. "This practice ends today," Alexander stated firmly. "Right now." He turned to Veronica and Captain Whitmore. "Ms. Palmer, you are suspended pending investigation. Captain Whitmore, you are relieved of command for this flight." Whitmore's face flushed with anger. "You can't do that. I'm the captain of this aircraft." "Actually, I can," Alexander replied, holding up his phone. "Protocol 27 has been activated. I have assumed direct operational control of this flight and all Pinnacle operations. First Officer Reynolds will complete this flight as acting captain." He turned back to the passengers. "In a moment, several members of our crew who have been documenting these abuses will assume service duties for the remainder of our journey. I ask for your patience during this transition." Sofia stepped forward, joined by 3 other flight attendants. They formed a line beside Alexander. "This is Sofia Rodriguez, who will serve as acting chief flight attendant for the remainder of this flight." Sofia's voice was steady as she addressed the cabin. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Passengers, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened while we reorganize our service plan. We'll resume normal operations in a few minutes." Whitmore, his face now mottled with rage, stepped forward. "This is outrageous. You can't just walk onto my aircraft and—" "Your aircraft?" Alexander asked quietly. "This aircraft, like every other in the Pinnacle fleet, belongs to the company I founded and lead. Your authority as captain derives from that company, and I've just revoked it." Whitmore's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, it seemed he might physically resist. "Sullivan will hear about this. The board won't stand for it. Sullivan has already been removed from all systems and is currently being escorted from headquarters by security," Alexander replied. "As for the board, they're reviewing the evidence of discrimination as we speak." Thomas Blackwell stood up, his face mottled with anger. "This is ridiculous. I was given this seat because I'm a premium customer." "No, Mr. Blackwell," Alexander corrected calmly. "You were given this seat because you're white. Your customer status had nothing to do with it." Blackwell sputtered. "How dare you accuse me?" "I'm not accusing you," Alexander interrupted. "You're a victim of this system, too. A system that told you your comfort was more important than other people's dignity. But that's a conversation for another time." He turned to Sofia. "Ms. Rodriguez, please escort Mr. Blackwell back to his originally assigned seat." "This is outrageous. I'll sue," Blackwell shouted. "That's your right," Alexander acknowledged. "Our legal team will be happy to address your concerns. They'll also be reviewing the recordings of your comments about maintaining standards and avoiding certain elements." Blackwell's face paled. He gathered his belongings and allowed Sofia to escort him toward economy without further protest. Alexander turned to Veronica and Captain Whitmore. "You both have a choice to make. You can cooperate with this transition and face the consequences of your actions through proper channels, or you can continue to resist and face additional charges of insubordination and interfering with aircraft operations." Whitmore's shoulders slumped in defeat. "I was just following orders," he muttered. "That excuse has never worked in the history of humanity," Alexander replied. "First Officer Reynolds is waiting for you to brief him." As Whitmore retreated to the cockpit, Veronica remained defiant. The board approved these measures, she insisted. James Sullivan himself implemented them with executive authority. "And James Sullivan will be removed from his position before this plane lands," Alexander stated. "Now please take a seat in 27F for the remainder of the flight. Your employee badge and credentials are suspended." Veronica's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand what you're doing," she hissed. "These policies weren't created in a vacuum. They're what premium customers expect, what they demand. "If our premium experience depends on discrimination," Alexander replied, "then it doesn't deserve to exist." As Sofia returned from escorting Blackwell, Alexander addressed her. "Ms. Rodriguez, please make an announcement inviting all passengers who were relocated to return to their originally assigned seats." Sofia nodded and picked up the intercom phone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you were asked to change your seat assignment during boarding, you are welcome to return to your originally booked seat. Our crew will assist you with your belongings." Alexander watched as the young black businessman, the Asian woman, and the Latino couple made their way forward, their expressions a mixture of vindication and lingering disbelief. As they settled into their rightful seats, Alexander remained standing in the center aisle. The transformation was visible not just in the physical rearrangement of passengers, but in the shift of power and dignity that permeated the aircraft. A silence fell over the cabin, but this time it wasn't the silence of tension or fear. It was the silence of witnesses to a moment of justice that few had ever expected to see. The next 30 minutes aboard Flight 673 unfolded like a carefully orchestrated dance of accountability. Alexander Brooks moved with methodical purpose, dismantling the infrastructure of discrimination piece by piece. In the cockpit, First Officer Michael Reynolds had assumed command. Captain Whitmore sat in the jump seat, his authority stripped away, his 20-year career hanging in the balance. Reynolds, a former Air Force pilot, maintained perfect composure as he announced the command change to air traffic control. "Chicago Control, Pinnacle 673. Be advised, we've had a command change. First Officer Reynolds now pilot in command. Continuing as filed, no emergency." In the main cabin, Sofia and the Dignity crew moved efficiently through their service duties, providing identical treatment to all passengers regardless of seating section. The atmosphere remained charged but controlled like the air after a necessary storm. Alexander had taken a seat in economy not as a gesture, but to personally interview affected passengers. With his phone recording, he documented testimony after testimony. "They told me my reservation had a verification flag on it," the young black businessman explained quietly. "This has happened to me 3 times in the past 2 months." The Asian woman, a neurosurgeon returning from a medical conference, shared her experience. "The gate agent said there was a system recalibration. I've been a platinum member for 7 years." Alexander listened, asked clarifying questions, and assured each passenger that their experiences would not be buried or dismissed. This wasn't just evidence gathering, it was the first step in healing. Meanwhile, his phone buzzed constantly with updates from Mia and the emergency response team at Pinnacle headquarters. Sullivan tried to destroy files before security arrived. Digital forensics team recovered everything. He's been escorted out. Board an emergency session. Initial shock has turned to focused inquiry. Most members claiming they never understood the true nature of the enhancement program. Media already picking up rumors. 3 reporters calling for comment. Legal team has drafted immediate termination notices for Sullivan, and 12 senior staff identified as key participants. Alexander responded to each message with clear, decisive instructions. This was no longer about a single flight, this was a company-wide reckoning unfolding in real time. In first class, Thomas Blackwell had demanded to speak with Alexander. Sofia relayed the request, and Alexander agreed to meet in the forward galley. "This is a PR nightmare," Blackwell hissed when they were face to face. "The optics alone will tank your stock." "I'm aware of the potential consequences," Alexander replied evenly. "Then you know this needs to be handled quietly. Compensation packages, NDAs, the usual cleanup." Blackwell lowered his voice. "My firm specializes in reputation management. For the right consideration, this incident never happened." Alexander studied him for a moment. "Mr. Blackwell, do you know why I started Pinnacle Airways?" The question caught Blackwell off guard. "I assume to make money like any business." "No. I started it because when I was 18, I was bumped from a flight to my grandmother's funeral. The gate agent gave my seat to a white businessman and told me there was a verification issue with my ticket. I watched that plane take off, knowing my grandmother would be buried without me there to say goodbye. Blackwell's expression faltered. So, no, Mr. Blackwell, there will be no quiet handling. There will be no NDAs. There will be transparency, accountability, and change. Not because it's good PR, but because it's right. Alexander turned to walk away, then paused. And just so we're clear, I'm not concerned about the stock price today. I'm concerned about the soul of this company for the next 50 years. As he returned to the main cabin, Alexander noticed Captain Whitmore quietly conversing with a first-class passenger, passing something that looked like a note. Moving closer, he overheard fragments. "Tell Sullivan. Evidence on my personal drive. Backup plan." Alexander interrupted smoothly. "Captain Whitmore, I believe First Officer Reynolds needed to consult with you about our approach into Chicago." Whitmore, startled, hastily ending his conversation. The passenger slipped the note into his jacket pocket and avoided eye contact. Alexander made a mental note to have security meet the aircraft and intercept this passenger. The conspiracy ran deeper than he had initially realized. His phone buzzed with an urgent message from Mia Critical Sullivan activated contingency measures. Multiple executives attempting mass deletion of documents. It has locked down all systems. Sullivan's allies inside the company are going scorched earth. The stakes continued to rise. This wasn't just about discrimination or even a corporate coup. It was rapidly becoming an existential battle for Pinnacle's survival. Alexander composed a company-wide message. "This is CEO Alexander Brooks. Effective immediately, all employee credentials are temporarily frozen pending security review. A comprehensive investigation into discriminatory practices is underway. Those who cooperate fully will be protected. Those who attempt to obstruct justice will be terminated and potentially face criminal charges. Pinnacle Airways was founded on the principle of dignity for all. Today, we recommit to that principle." As the message transmitted to thousands of employees across the Pinnacle network, Alexander felt the weight of the moment. The company he had built from nothing now stood at a crossroads, one path leading to fundamental transformation, the other to collapse under the weight of exposed corruption. The aircraft began its descent, the gentle downward tilt, physically embodying the shift that had occurred. As the sprawling cityscape of Chicago came into view, Alexander Brooks looked out the window with clear-eyed determination. In 35 minutes he had reclaimed his seat, his airline, and, most importantly, the principle upon which he had built it all. That dignity was not a luxury amenity, but a human right. The real test, however, awaited on the ground. As Flight 673 began its descent into Chicago, Alexander Brooks moved to the center of the aircraft to address all passengers. His presence commanded attention without demanding it the natural authority of a man standing firmly in his truth. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Alexander Brooks, CEO of Pinnacle Airways. I want to apologize to each of you for the disruption to your flight experience today. What you have witnessed is the exposure and correction of a discriminatory policy that violated everything our airline claims to stand for." He paused, looking directly at passengers in every section of the aircraft. "To those who were displaced from your rightful seats, I offer my deepest apology. What happened to you was wrong. It was wrong as a matter of company policy, wrong as a matter of law, and wrong as a matter of basic human dignity." In economy, the Latino couple held hands tightly. The husband whispered a translation to his wife, whose eyes glistened with unshed tears. "To all passengers, in a moment, our crew will distribute a form. If you choose to provide your information, you will receive full compensation for today's flight, regardless of what you paid or where you sat. More importantly, you'll receive a direct acknowledgement of how your experience was affected, for better or worse, by the policies I've discontinued today." Murmurs spread through the cabin, some surprised, others appreciative of the directness. "I also want to be transparent about what happens next. Upon landing, several members of our crew will be escorted from the aircraft by corporate security. They will face appropriate consequences for their actions. This is not a moment of triumph for me. It is a moment of accountability for all of us at Pinnacle Airways." Alexander gestured to Sofia and her team. These crew members chose to document and resist the discriminatory practices they were instructed to implement. They risked their jobs to protect your dignity. They represent the true spirit of this airline, a spirit I intend to restore fully. Sofia stood straighter, her earlier nervousness replaced by quiet pride. "Finally, I want to speak directly to an issue that many might be uncomfortable naming. What you witnessed today was racism executed through corporate policy. At Pinnacle Airways, we will no longer hide behind euphemisms like passenger composition or demographic balancing. We will name the problem directly, and we will address it completely." The cabin had fallen completely silent. Even those who had been uncomfortable with Alexander's intervention were now listening intently. From the back of the plane, a voice called out the young black businessman who had been relocated. "Mr. Brooks, I've flown Pinnacle for years. This has happened to me repeatedly, but I never knew it was policy. I thought it was just the way things are." Alexander nodded solemnly. "That's precisely the problem, sir. When discrimination becomes so normalized that we accept it as inevitable, that's when it's most dangerous. Today marks the end of that acceptance at Pinnacle Airways." From first class, a white executive spoke up. "While I appreciate your commitment to equality, Mr. Brooks, some of us paid a premium for a certain experience. Doesn't this undermine the value proposition?" The question hung in the air, direct, challenging, but not entirely unreasonable. Alexander considered it thoughtfully. "That's a fair question. What exactly is the premium experience you paid for wider seats, better food, more attentive service, or the absence of people who don't look like you?" The executive shifted uncomfortably. I know you didn't mean to suggest that." "Explicitly," Alexander continued gently. "But that's what makes this situation so insidious. The premium experience had quietly evolved to include demographic curation without anyone openly acknowledging it. My commitment to you and all our premium passengers is that you will receive every amenity and service level you've paid for, but those amenities will never again include protection from diversity." An elderly white man in first class nodded slowly. "Son, I've been flying first class for 40 years. Back when I started, they didn't even try to hide it. There were practically no people of color up front. What you're doing today is long overdue." As the conversation continued throughout the cabin, the atmosphere shifted from tension to something more productive, a communal reckoning with uncomfortable truths. Some passengers remained silent, processing. Others engaged openly, sharing perspectives and experiences. A few typed furiously on phones, documenting the unprecedented moment. Sofia approached Alexander quietly. "Captain Whitmore is requesting to speak with you privately. Says it's urgent." Alexander nodded. "I'll meet him in the forward galley." In the confined space of the galley, Whitmore stood with his captain's hat in his hands, his earlier defiance replaced with visible anxiety. "Brooks, I need you to understand something." He began without preamble. "Sullivan has contingencies you don't know about. This goes beyond seating policies." Alexander assessed the man carefully. "Explain." "There's a group of 8 senior executives who've been working with Sullivan on what they call strategic realignment. They've been documenting everything that could be used against you: philanthropy expenses, diversity initiatives that didn't meet financial targets, anything that could be spun as prioritizing social agenda over shareholder value. And you know this because Alexander prompted." Whitmore swallowed hard. "I've been at their meetings. Sullivan promised me a senior operations role after the transition." Alexander's expression remained impassive. "Why tell me this now?" "Because I've made mistakes, but I'm not willing to go down with Sullivan's ship." Whitmore reached into his pocket and produced a thumb drive. "This contains meeting recordings. emails the full plan, including their contingency for today. Alexander took the drive, his mind racing. What contingency? They anticipated you might discover the policy eventually. They have a prepared statement claiming it was a limited market test that you approved but conveniently forgot during your increasing absenteeism. They've been documenting every charity event every day away from headquarters, building a narrative of a founder who's lost interest in operations. The strategy was clever, using Alexander's philanthropic work against him to question his commitment to the company. It would be plausible enough to create doubt, especially with the right board members primed to be receptive. "Why should I believe you're not still working for Sullivan?" Alexander asked. Whitmore's face showed genuine fear. "Because I have a family, a pension, 20 years at this airline. I made bad choices, followed orders I should have questioned. But I never signed up for a corporate coup." Alexander studied him for a long moment. "Your cooperation will be noted, but it doesn't erase your actions. Return to the jump seat. We'll address your situation after landing." As Whitmore left, Alexander's phone vibrated with a message from Mia: urgent update. Sullivan team executing media strategy. Story already leaked to business press. Pinnacle CEO has mid-air meltdown. They're spinning this as emotional instability. Alexander wasn't surprised. Sullivan had prepared thoroughly, anticipating multiple scenarios. The question was whether his contingency planning had accounted for the volume of evidence Alexander now possessed. As he returned to the main cabin, Alexander noticed something remarkable. Throughout the aircraft, passengers who had been segregated were now engaged in conversation across the artificial boundaries of cabin class. The Latino couple was showing family photos to a white executive. The Asian neurosurgeon was discussing medical innovations with an elderly passenger. The forced reorganization had created unexpected connections. This, Alexander realized, was what Pinnacle should have been all along, not just transportation from point A to point B, but a shared human experience where dignity transcended the arbitrary boundaries of seating assignments. As the aircraft continued its descent, Alexander moved through the cabin, listening, observing, and occasionally joining conversations. The airline he had founded was revealing itself anew, not through corporate policies or marketing slogans, but through these small, genuine human interactions. His phone buzzed again. Mia with another update. Board emergency meeting confirmed for immediate post-landing. All members will attend. Sullivan allies attempting to frame narrative but evidence disrupting their efforts. Legal team ready with termination documents. The final battle for Pinnacle Airways would begin the moment the aircraft touched the ground. The jet bridge connected with a soft thump. Flight 673 had arrived in Chicago, but the shockwaves of what had transpired were just beginning to spread. First Officer, now acting Captain Reynolds, opened the cockpit door. "Mr. Brooks, we've arrived at gate B-17. Ground personnel report there's quite a reception waiting." Alexander nodded. "Thank you, Captain Reynolds. Please complete your shutdown procedures normally. Security will escort Captain Whitmore from the aircraft." As if on cue, 2 Pinnacle security officers appeared at the aircraft door, their expressions professionally neutral. "Mr. Brooks, we're here as requested," the lead officer stated. "Thank you, Officer Diaz. Please escort Miss Palmer and Captain Whitmore to Conference Room 3 in the Operations Center. They are suspended pending investigation. Their badges and access credentials are temporarily revoked." Whitmore emerged from the cockpit, his face ashen. "This is an outrage. The pilots' union will—" "The pilots' union," Alexander interrupted calmly, "has already been notified of a potential safety violation involving discriminatory practices affecting cabin composition and passenger treatment. They're sending a representative." Whitmore fell silent, the full implications hitting him. This wasn't just about his job. His professional reputation and possibly his license were at stake. Veronica Palmer stood from her assigned economy seat, her earlier confidence shattered. "You're making a terrible mistake," she said, her voice barely audible. "No, Ms. Palmer. The mistake was made 4 months ago when you chose to participate in a discriminatory scheme. Today is simply the correction." As security escorted Whitmore and Palmer from the aircraft, passengers began to record the moment on their phones. The imagery was powerful. The captain and chief flight attendant, symbols of authority in the aviation hierarchy, reduced to escorted employees under investigation. Alexander stepped aside, allowing Sofia to manage the normal deplaning procedures. From the jet bridge, he could see a gathering crowd in the terminal, several news crews, a cluster of Pinnacle executives, and what appeared to be legal representatives. His phone rang. Mia Hernandez. He answered immediately. "Alexander Sullivan is barricaded in Conference Room 1 with 4 board members and his legal team. They're claiming you've violated governance procedures and are demanding your immediate resignation." "What's our status?" Alexander asked calmly. "Security has contained the situation. IT has locked down all systems as instructed. Legal has presented preliminary evidence to remaining board members." "They're shocked, Alexander. The documents are explicit, and the media situation growing by the minute. 3 major networks and business press. Sullivan's team leaked the CEO meltdown narrative, but we've counter-released a statement about CEO uncovers and addresses discriminatory practices. Social media is exploding with passenger videos from the flight." Alexander spotted Rachel Goldstein, Pinnacle's general counsel, waiting at the end of the jet bridge with Marcus Johnson, chief of human resources. "I'll be there in 3 minutes," Alexander told Mia. "Have the evidence packets ready for all board members." "And Mia, thank you." As Alexander approached Rachel and Marcus, their expressions told different stories. Rachel's professional concern, Marcus's barely concealed alarm. Rachel began without preamble. "I've reviewed the preliminary evidence. The liability exposure is massive. Class action potential, regulatory penalties, DOT and FAA investigations, civil rights violations." "I'm aware," Alexander replied. "Have you briefed the board, those not currently sequestered with Sullivan?" "Yes." "They're stunned. Most claim they had no idea about the full nature of the enhancement program." Alexander turned to Marcus, whose discomfort was palpable. "Marcus, your assessment?" Marcus cleared his throat. "From an HR perspective, it's catastrophic. Dozens of employees implicated. Potential wrongful termination suits from staff who resisted the policies. Training materials that explicitly violated our own anti-discrimination policies. They walked briskly through the terminal, a phalanx of security clearing their path through gathering crowds. Passengers from Flight 673 were emerging, some already speaking to news crews. Sullivan's position, Alexander asked. Marcus and Rachel exchanged glances. "He's claiming the policies were implemented with your implicit approval," Rachel said carefully. "Says you were briefed on customer experience improvements and approved the metrics without asking for specifics." "That's a lie," Alexander stated flatly. "We know," Rachel assured him. "The document trail is clear. Sullivan deliberately circumvented normal approval channels and kept the operational details contained among a small group of loyalists." As they approached the elevator to the executive offices, Alexander spotted a familiar figure among the gathered media. Thomas Blackwell speaking animatedly to a CNBC reporter. The words "unprofessional" and "overreaction" were audible even from a distance. Alexander paused. Rachel prepared termination documents for Sullivan and all identified co-conspirators. Marcus assembled a communication package for all employees explaining today's events and our zero-tolerance policy moving forward. He checked his watch. "The board meeting begins in 20 minutes. I need 10 minutes alone to prepare." As they rode the elevator to the executive floor, Alexander's phone buzzed constantly with notifications, messages from industry colleagues, alerts from news organizations, emails from concerned investors. The story was spreading with the viral velocity that only true controversy could generate. The executive offices of Pinnacle Airways Chicago hub were in controlled chaos. Staff moved purposefully between conference rooms. Security personnel stood at key positions. Through glass walls, Alexander could see clusters of executives in intense discussion. At the end of the main hallway, Conference Room 1 was visibly tense. James Sullivan paced anxiously, gesturing emphatically to board members while legal counsel attempted to moderate. When Sullivan spotted Alexander through the glass, his expression transformed from confidence to momentary uncertainty before hardening into defiance. Alexander turned to Rachel. "What's Sullivan's leverage with those board members?" "Financial entanglements," she replied quietly. "Harrison and Peters have investment ties to Sullivan's family. Williams was Sullivan's mentor at his previous airline. And Fletcher just wants stock price stability at any cost." Marcus cleared his throat. "Alexander, I need to ask, are you prepared for what happens if you lose this fight? Sullivan has been methodically building his case for months. He's convinced some significant shareholders that your focus on ethics and philanthropy has distracted from financial performance." Alexander looked at his HR chief directly. "I founded this airline because dignity matters. If Pinnacle can't operate ethically, then it doesn't deserve to operate at all." The statement hung in the air, not a negotiating position, but a foundational principle. "I'll be in my office for 10 minutes, Alexander continued. "Then we face the board. This ends today." In the privacy of his office, Alexander closed the door and took a deep breath, his first moment alone since the ordeal began. The magnitude of what was unfolding washed over him. This wasn't just a corporate power struggle. This was a defining moment for what business could and should be. He opened his laptop and reviewed the mounting evidence against Sullivan, thousands of relocated passengers, explicit training materials, dual reporting systems, all designed to systematically discriminate while maintaining plausible deniability. The scope was breathtaking, the execution calculated. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Sofia Rodriguez stood at his door. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Brooks, but I thought you should have this before the board meeting." She handed him a USB drive, recordings of every crew briefing where these policies were discussed. Veronica was explicit about demographic balance and which passengers should be reevaluated for premium cabins. Alexander took the drive gratefully. "Thank you, Sofia, for everything. My father always told me dignity isn't something anyone can take from you, but sometimes you have to stand up to keep it." She hesitated. "Whatever happens in that board meeting, some of us will stand with you." As she turned to leave, Alexander felt a renewed sense of purpose. This fight wasn't just about corporate control. It was about the thousands of employees like Sofia who deserved leadership that reflected their values. The 10 minutes passed quickly. Alexander gathered his materials and stepped into the hallway where Rachel and Marcus waited. Sullivan's requesting a private meeting before the board session, Rachel informed him. "Says it's in everyone's best interest to find an amicable resolution." Alexander considered this. "Where Conference Room 2? Just him?" Alexander nodded. "I'll give him 5 minutes." Conference Room 2 was smaller, more intimate than the main boardroom. Sullivan stood at the window, his back to the door, as Alexander entered. Once the picture of corporate polish, the COO now showed visible strain. Tie-loosened hair, slightly disheveled, the confident posture replaced by tension. He turned as Alexander closed the door. "Alexander. James." Sullivan gestured to a chair. "Let's talk like reasonable men." "I think we're past that point," Alexander replied, remaining standing. Sullivan sighed. "Look, things got out of hand. The enhancement program was well-intentioned but poorly executed. Some overzealous staff took the guidelines too literally. We can fix this." Alexander studied the man he had once trusted implicitly. "Is that really the approach you want to take? Pretending this was a misunderstanding rather than a deliberate strategy?" Sullivan's facade cracked slightly. "Fine. The program worked, Alexander. Revenue and premium cabins increased 22%. Satisfaction scores from high-value customers improved. Those are facts. At what cost? Alexander asked quietly. Minimal. Sullivan's voice rose. Some people got different seats. No one was denied boarding. No one was harmed. No one was harmed, Alexander repeated. A Latino family saving for months for a special vacation was publicly humiliated. A black executive was treated like an interloper in a space he paid to occupy. An Asian doctor was made to feel she didn't belong in her rightful seat. That's harm, James. Deep, lasting harm. Sullivan waved dismissively. Emotional arguments. Business runs on numbers. Pinnacle runs on values. Alexander corrected. Values you betrayed while attempting to seize control of my company. For the first time, Sullivan looked genuinely caught off guard. That's absurd. Is it? I've seen the succession planning documents, the narrative you've been building about my distraction and absenteeism, the careful alignment of board members sympathetic to your vision. Sullivan's expression hardened. The board has concerns about your priorities. That's not a coup, it's governance. And the discriminatory seating policy. Was that governance too? It was reality. Sullivan snapped his careful phrasing, abandoned. Premium customers don't want to pay thousands for a seat next to someone who makes them uncomfortable. We can pretend that's not true, but the market says otherwise. Alexander nodded slowly. Thank you for your honesty, James. I needed to hear you say it directly. Sullivan suddenly noticed Alexander's phone on the table, its recording app active. His face flushed with anger. You set me up. No, Alexander corrected. You set yourself up through months of documented discrimination and attempted corporate sabotage. I'm just ensuring there's no ambiguity about your intentions. He moved toward the door. The board meeting begins in 5 minutes. You're welcome to attend as we review the evidence and vote on your termination. Sullivan's voice turned cold. This isn't over, Alexander. The financial markets won't reward your moral grandstanding. When the stock drops 20% tomorrow, shareholders will remember who delivered results and who delivered social justice theater. Alexander paused at the door. You still don't understand what Pinnacle Airways is, do you? It was never just about profit margins. It was about creating a company where dignity matters for passengers, for employees, for everyone. Dignity doesn't pay dividends, Sullivan retorted. We're about to find out if that's true, Alexander replied and closed the door behind him. The Pinnacle Airways boardroom occupied the top floor of the company's Chicago Operations Center, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the airfield. Under normal circumstances, the vista of aircraft taking off and landing served as a calming backdrop to corporate governance. Today, it felt like watching the company's reputation take flight destination unknown. 10 board members sat around the polished mahogany table, their expressions ranging from concern to outright hostility. At the head of the table, Alexander Brooks stood instead of sitting, a subtle but deliberate choice that established his command of the situation. I've called this emergency session. He began to address a crisis of both legal and ethical dimensions. 4 months ago, a program was implemented at Pinnacle Airways that systematically discriminated against passengers of color by removing them from premium cabins to create what internal documents called a more homogeneous first-class experience. Board member William Fletcher, a silver-haired investment banker, interrupted immediately. Alexander, shouldn't we be discussing this in closed session with counsel present? The liability implications alone. Rachel is present as counsel, Alexander replied, gesturing to the general counsel seated nearby. And as for closed sessions that approach, is precisely how we arrived at this crisis. Transparency begins now in this room. He tapped his tablet and the boardroom screens displayed a series of emails, training documents, and statistical analyses. This morning, I personally experienced this discrimination when I was removed from a first-class seat on Flight 673 and relocated to economy. The stated reason was that I didn't meet the qualifications for premium seating despite being the founder and CEO of this airline. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Victoria Harrington, the newest board member and CEO of a luxury retail chain, looked particularly distressed. What you're seeing on your screens is evidence of a coordinated effort led by now former COO James Sullivan to systematically discriminate against passengers of color in premium cabins. The program was officially called Premium Experience Enhancement, but its purpose was clear: to create racially homogeneous first-class cabins under the guise of customer comfort. Alexander swiped to display more documents. You'll also see evidence of a coordinated attempt to undermine my leadership and potentially remove me as CEO. This included creating a false narrative about my commitment to the company, documenting my philanthropic work as evidence of distraction, and cultivating relationships with several members of this board to support an eventual succession plan. All eyes turned to James Sullivan, who had chosen to attend and now sat with arms crossed, his expression defiant. Board member Richard Donnelly, a longtime airline industry executive, cleared his throat. Alexander, while I'm disturbed by these allegations, I must point out that customer demographic management is standard practice across the industry. Alexander fixed him with a steady gaze. Are you suggesting, Richard, that racial discrimination is acceptable if it's an industry standard? Donnelly backpedaled quickly. Of course not. I'm simply saying that passenger composition is a complex. There's nothing complex about this situation, Alexander interrupted. Pinnacle Airways has been engaging in illegal discrimination, full stop. The question before this board is how we respond. Sullivan leaned forward. Before we proceed with this performance, I'd like to remind the board that under my operational leadership, Pinnacle has achieved record profits for 3 consecutive quarters. Premium cabin revenue is up 22%. Customer satisfaction among high-value passengers has increased 17%. These are measurable results, not emotional appeals. Alexander nodded. James is correct about those metrics. What he omits is that they were achieved by implementing policies that violate federal law, expose the company to massive liability, and betray our foundational values. He moved to the center of the room, command radiating from his still casual attire, a stark contrast to the boardroom suits surrounding him. I have already taken initial steps under my authority as CEO. All aspects of the Premium Experience Enhancement program have been halted company-wide. Several employees directly implicated in implementing discriminatory practices have been suspended pending investigation. Fletcher leaned forward anxiously. The market response will be severe, Alexander. We're looking at potential stock devaluation of 15 to 20% by tomorrow's close. I'm aware of the financial implications, Alexander replied evenly. I'm also aware of the human implications, the legal liability, and the long-term damage to our brand if we attempt to minimize or cover up these actions. Sullivan scoffed. Always the idealist. This is business, Alexander, not a social justice seminar. Our responsibility is to shareholder value. Our responsibility, Alexander corrected, is to operate legally, ethically, and profitably in that order. The policies you implemented fail on at least 2 of those criteria. He turned to address the full board. Each of you now faces a choice. Quarterly customer satisfaction reports for the past 3 cycles highlighted improved premium cabin demographics and enhanced passenger composition metrics. These reports were presented to this board and unanimously approved. Several board members glanced at each other nervously. The question is who understood what those euphemisms actually meant, and who was deceived. Along with our passengers, board member Leonard Harrison, one of Sullivan's closest allies, spoke for the first time. This is manufactured outrage. Alexander has been increasingly absent from operational oversight. Now he swoops in with accusations when the results speak for themselves. This is about control, not ethics. The accusation hung in the air, its underlying threat clear. This could become a protracted power struggle that would damage the company regardless of outcome. Alexander remained calm. "I understand loyalty, Leonard, but I would encourage you to review the documentation carefully. The policies implemented weren't just ethically questionable, they were plainly illegal." Before Harrison could respond, the boardroom door opened. Mia Hernandez entered with a security officer who whispered something to her. She approached Alexander and spoke quietly in his ear. "Federal Aviation Administration representatives have arrived," Alexander announced. "They're requesting access to our records regarding passenger seating policies in response to multiple discrimination complaints filed this afternoon." The announcement landed like a concrete block. Government investigation changed the calculation dramatically. Victoria Harrington spoke for the first time, her voice steady despite her evident distress. "As the newest member of this board, I can state unequivocally that I never understood demographic balancing to mean racial discrimination. I'm horrified by what you've presented, and I fully support a transparent investigation." Alexander nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Victoria." Board member Elena Rodriguez, who had remained silent until now, straightened her posture. "I had concerns about these metrics when they were first presented, but I allowed myself to be reassured by Sullivan's explanations. That was my failing, and I will cooperate fully with the investigation." Sullivan's expression darkened as he watched support erode. "This is a witch hunt. Alexander is sacrificing shareholder value for his personal moral agenda. The policies were designed to maximize revenue, not to discriminate. Yet they did discriminate." Alexander replied. "Systematically and intentionally. The documentation is unambiguous." One by one, board members began to declare their positions, some with genuine remorse, others with careful political calculation. The room's atmosphere shifted from hostile resistance to somber accountability. Fletcher, still focused on financial implications, leaned forward. "Assuming we acknowledge the problem, what's your plan for containing the damage? The stock impact alone could be devastating." Alexander tapped his tablet again, and the screens displayed a new document titled Pinnacle Reset Transparency and Accountability Framework. "This is our path forward," he explained. "It begins with a complete public disclosure of what happened. No euphemisms, no corporate speak, no minimizing. We will acknowledge the discrimination that occurred, take full responsibility, and detail the concrete steps we're taking to ensure it never happens again." Chief Legal Counsel Rachel Goldstein winced visibly. Alexander, from a liability perspective, such explicit acknowledgement. "Will cost us money." Alexander finished her sentence. "Yes, it will. But attempting to minimize or deny what happened will cost us our soul, and ultimately far more money in the long run." He outlined the key components of the plan: an independent audit of all company policies, mandatory bias training for all staff, new oversight protocols for passenger service, and significant compensation for affected passengers. Most importantly, he concluded we will create the industry's first passenger Bill of Rights with explicit protections against discrimination of any kind. Pinnacle Airways will transform from a cautionary tale into a model for the entire industry. Sullivan stood abruptly. "This is corporate suicide. I refuse to participate in it." He gathered his materials. "I expect my severance package will reflect my contributions to this company's success, not this manufactured crisis." Alexander met his gaze calmly. "James, you are terminated for cause effective immediately. There will be no severance package." Sullivan's face flushed with anger. "You'll be hearing from my attorneys. I expect we will," Alexander acknowledged, "as will federal investigators." As Sullivan stormed from the room, the atmosphere shifted palpably. The confrontation that had been building for months had finally reached its climax and resolution. Board chairwoman Margaret Chen, who had been observing the proceedings with careful neutrality, finally spoke. What you're proposing is unprecedented, Alexander. The financial impact will be substantial. The media scrutiny will be intense. Yes, Alexander agreed simply. And you believe this is the only viable path forward? Alexander gazed out at the airfield, where a Pinnacle Airways jet was accelerating down the runway, lifting gracefully into the afternoon sky. When I founded this company 15 years ago, I did so because I had experienced discrimination as a passenger and believed I could build something better. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that founding principle. This isn't just the viable path forward, Margaret. It's the only path that honors why Pinnacle Airways exists in the first place. He turned back to the board, his expression resolute. I won't pretend this will be easy. Our stock will take a hit. Some customers may leave. The legal and financial consequences will be significant. But at the end of this process, we will have an airline that truly lives its values rather than just advertising them. Fletcher sighed heavily. Your idealism is admirable, Alexander, but markets punish idealism. Sometimes, Alexander acknowledged, but they also reward authenticity, integrity, and genuine differentiation. I believe we can be profitable without being predatory. If I'm wrong, I'll accept the consequences. But I won't compromise on this core principle. Chairwoman Chen studied him for a long moment, then nodded decisively. I move to approve the Pinnacle Reset Framework as presented and to authorize the CEO to take all necessary actions to implement it effective immediately. Victoria Harrington immediately seconded the motion. The vote that followed wasn't unanimous. Fletcher and 3 others dissented, but the overwhelming majority supported the plan. As the board meeting concluded, Alexander remained at the window watching planes take off and land in perfect sequence. Each represented thousands of passengers trusting Pinnacle Airways with their safety and dignity. It was a trust that had been betrayed and now had to be rebuilt, one flight, one passenger, one decision at a time. His phone vibrated with a message from Mia press conference set up in main auditorium. All major networks, ready when you are. Alexander straightened his shoulders and turned toward the door. The next phase of the reckoning was about to begin. Sofia Rodriguez stood in the crowded employee break room of Pinnacle's Chicago Operations Center, surrounded by colleagues watching the live press conference on the wall-mounted television. Alexander Brooks stood at a podium, cameras flashing as he addressed the media directly. Today, Pinnacle Airways failed to live up to its most basic obligation to treat every passenger with equal dignity and respect. He was saying, his voice steady and uncompromising. As CEO, I take full responsibility for this failure. A flight attendant beside Sofia muttered, He's tanking the company. Stock's already down 8% in after-hours trading. Another responded, Maybe it should tank. What they were doing was wrong. Sofia remained silent, her mind replaying the moment on the aircraft when she had made her choice. The moment she had slipped Alexander that note, despite knowing it could cost her the career she'd worked so hard to build. Growing up in a small apartment in Queens, Sofia had watched her parents sacrifice everything for her future. Her father, once a respected aerospace engineer in Guatemala, had fled political persecution only to find his credentials meaningless in America. Her mother, a former literature professor, cleaned hotel rooms 7 days a week. Both worked with quiet dignity, never complaining. But Sofia saw the toll it took the way their shoulders slumped a little more each year, the way their eyes dulled when they were treated as invisible. When Sofia was 16, she had accompanied her father to his night shift cleaning offices at LaGuardia Airport. As they worked, a corporate executive had entered needing documents from his desk. He had looked through her father, not at him, but through him barking orders without a single please or thank you or moment of eye contact. Later that night, Sofia had found her father sitting alone in the break room, his hands trembling slightly. "Papa, why did you let him speak to you that way?" she had asked. Her father had looked up, his eyes tired but resolute. "Mi hija, there are 2 kinds of dignity in this world. The kind others give you, which can be taken away, and the kind you carry inside which no one can touch unless you surrender it. He had straightened his uniform. I need this job, but I never surrender my inner dignity. Remember that. That moment had shaped Sofia's life philosophy. When she was accepted to Pinnacle's flight attendant program, beating out thousands of applicants, her parents had been overjoyed. At orientation, when executives spoke about treating all passengers with respect, she had felt she'd found a company that shared her values, until the enhancement program began. Her phone buzzed with yet another message from her mother. "Mija, are you okay? We're seeing the news." Since the flight had landed 3 hours ago, Sofia's phone hadn't stopped. Colleagues from across the Pinnacle Network family members, even former classmates, had somehow learned of her involvement in the day's events. On screen, a reporter asked Mr. Brooks' reports suggest that a group of employees called the Dignity Crew helped expose these practices. Will they face any repercussions for violating company confidentiality? Alexander's response was immediate. The employees who documented these discriminatory practices will face no repercussions. In fact, they deserve our gratitude. They upheld Pinnacle's true values when the company itself had failed to do so. Sofia felt eyes turned toward her in the break room. Her role as part of the Dignity Crew was already an open secret among staff. Some colleagues looked at her with newfound respect. Others, particularly those closest to Veronica, glared with open hostility. Her phone rang her father this time. She stepped into the hallway to answer. "Papa, I'm okay, just busy with everything happening." Her father's voice came through tight with emotion. "Sofia, your mother and I saw you in the background of the news footage. We're so proud of you, mi hija." Sofia leaned against the wall, unexpected tears stinging her eyes. "I was scared, Papa. I still am. Some people here are saying we betrayed the company. No, mi hija. You remembered what I taught you. Dignity isn't something anyone can take from you, but sometimes you have to stand up to keep it. Gracias, Papa. Te quiero. Te queremos, Sofia." As she ended the call, she noticed Mia Hernandez approaching from down the hallway. "Ms. Rodriguez, Mr. Brooks would like to speak with you when the press conference concludes." Sofia's stomach tightened. Despite Alexander's public statement about the Dignity Crew, she still feared her career was in jeopardy. "Am I in trouble?" Mia's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Quite the opposite, I believe." 20 minutes later, Sofia found herself in a small conference room waiting nervously. The door opened and Alexander Brooks entered, looking remarkably composed despite the chaos of the day. "Sofia," he said warmly, extending his hand. "Thank you for meeting with me." She stood quickly, shaking his hand. "Of course, sir. I hope the press conference went well." "As well as could be expected when announcing that your company has been engaging in illegal discrimination," he replied with a wry smile. He gestured for her to sit and took a chair across from her, rather than at the head of the table, a small but significant choice. "Sofia, I wanted to speak with you directly to thank you for what you did today. Your note was the confirmation I needed at a crucial moment." She nodded, still tense. "I was just doing what seemed right. That's precisely why I wanted to speak with you." Doing what seems right in a moment of pressure isn't as common as we might hope. Alexander leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, how did the Dignity Crew form?" Sofia took a deep breath. "It started about 3 months ago. We began noticing patterns in the seat reassignments, how they always seemed to affect certain passengers. When we raised concerns through official channels, we were told it was just customer experience optimization." She described how the informal group had begun documenting incidents, carefully collecting evidence while maintaining their professional duties. "We were afraid," she admitted. "The first member who spoke up, Alicia Gomez, was fired for inconsistent service standards 2 days later. But each time I helped move someone who looked like my parents or my grandparents out of first class, something inside me broke a little. Alexander listened intently, asking occasional questions, but mostly allowing her to tell the full story. When she finished, he remained thoughtful for a moment. Sofia, I'm creating a new position, Vice President of Service Integrity. This person will report directly to me and be responsible for ensuring that our treatment of passengers is equitable, dignified, and transparent. They will have authority to implement new training, audit service practices, and hold leadership accountable. Sofia nodded. That sounds like an important role. I'd like you to take it. She stared at him, certain she had misheard. Mr. Brooks, I'm just a flight attendant. I don't have executive experience. You have exactly the experience this role requires, Alexander countered. You recognized injustice when you saw it. You documented it methodically. You built a coalition of like-minded colleagues. And most importantly, you were willing to risk your career to uphold basic human dignity. Sofia's mind raced. The opportunity was beyond anything she had imagined possible. But doubt crept in immediately. The other executives wouldn't respect me, she said quietly. They'd see me as the flight attendant who got lucky, and I've never managed people at that level. Alexander considered this. That's a fair concern. So let me ask you, what role do you think would allow you to make the most meaningful impact on this problem? Sofia thought carefully before answering. The real change needs to happen on the front lines with the flight attendants, gate agents, and customer service representatives who interact with passengers every day. They need training, yes, but also a leader who understands their reality. She straightened in her chair, an idea taking shape. What about a director of service culture and training? Someone who designs the new approaches and works directly with crew members to implement them. Alexander's expression brightened. That's exactly the kind of role I was considering as an alternative. You'd develop the training programs, help select and train team leaders across the network, and have direct input on service policies. I could do that, Sofia said, confidence growing in her voice. I could make a real difference in that position. Then consider yourself appointed, Alexander replied. Effective immediately. Your first assignment is to gather the Dignity crew and begin developing recommendations for our service reset. As they discussed the details of her new role, Sofia felt both excitement and apprehension. The opportunity was extraordinary, but the backlash would be inevitable. Already, messages from Veronica's allies had appeared on her phone, subtle threats, promises of retaliation. Mr. Brooks, she said hesitantly, not everyone is happy about today's events. Some of the senior crew are loyal to Ms. Palmer. Alexander nodded gravely. I won't pretend this transition will be smooth, Sofia. There will be resistance, some passive, some active. You'll face accusations of disloyalty, opportunism, even betrayal. How do I handle that? She asked. By staying focused on what matters, creating a service culture where dignity is non-negotiable. The most effective response to resistance isn't confrontation, but consistent demonstration of your values. Near the end of their meeting, she gathered her courage to ask a personal question. Mr. Brooks, may I ask, how did you stay so calm today? From the moment they asked you to move to when you revealed who you were, you never lost your composure. Alexander was quiet for a moment. My father taught me something when I was young. He said, son, when you're black in America, your anger, no matter how justified, will often be used to dismiss your truth. So I learned to channel that emotion into clarity and purpose instead. He looked out the window at a Pinnacle jet taxiing past. But don't mistake composure for absence of feeling. What happened today was deeply painful. The difference is, I'm now in a position to transform that pain into change. Sofia nodded, understanding completely. My father taught me something similar. As she left the conference room with her new title and responsibilities, Sofia felt the weight of the day's events settling into a different kind of gravity, the pull of purpose rather than the pressure of fear. In the employee cafeteria, she found herself face-to-face with Jennifer Adams, Veronica's closest ally and most senior flight attendant. "Enjoying your reward for betrayal?" Jennifer asked coldly, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Sofia felt dozens of eyes turn toward them. Her instinct was to retreat, to diffuse, to apologize, patterns deeply ingrained from years of service training. Instead, she remembered her father's words about inner dignity and Alexander's example of composed strength. "It wasn't betrayal, Jennifer," she replied calmly. "It was loyalty to what Pinnacle should be." "You'll regret this," Jennifer hissed. "Palmer has friends throughout this company. Brooks won't always be there to protect you." "I don't need protection," Sofia answered, surprising herself with her steadiness. "I need colleagues who understand that dignity isn't a premium amenity." She walked away feeling something shift within herself, the first step in her own transformation from someone who had simply resisted wrongdoing to someone who would help build something better in its place. That evening, in the quiet of her apartment, Sofia created a new group text to the Dignity crew: "We have work to do, and this time we have permission to do it right." As messages of support flooded in, Sofia realized the true significance of the day's events. This wasn't just about airline seating or corporate policies. It was about the courage to stand for dignity when doing so carried real risk, the very lesson her parents had taught her through their quiet example every day of her life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, resistance, and the daunting task of transforming an entire service culture. But tonight, Sofia Rodriguez allowed herself to feel something unfamiliar yet powerful, the quiet satisfaction of having honored both her family's legacy and her own deepest values regardless of the cost. 2 weeks after the Flight 673 incident, Alexander Brooks stood in Pinnacle Airways' main training center, addressing over 200 managers from across the company's network. The large room buzzed with anticipation and anxiety. No one quite knew what to expect from this unprecedented gathering. "Thank you all for adjusting your schedules on short notice," Alexander began. "The changes we're implementing couldn't wait for our regular quarterly meetings." On the large screen behind him, a simple phrase appeared. "Dignity is non-negotiable. This is our new core principle," he stated clearly. "It will guide every policy, every procedure, and every interaction at Pinnacle Airways moving forward." For the next hour, Alexander outlined the comprehensive transformation already underway, what internal documents called the Pinnacle Reset. The changes were sweeping and fundamental. First, the accountability structure. An independent ethics board had been established with authority to review any passenger complaint of discrimination. This board included civil rights attorneys, industry experts, and most notably Dr. Elijah Taylor, the professor who had been on Flight 673. Second, the technology. The algorithm that had enabled discrimination had been completely dismantled. A new transparent system was being built, with a clear audit trail for every seating decision. Passengers could now request details on why any change was made to their reservation. Third, the training. Led by Sofia Rodriguez, a completely revamped training program was being rolled out to all customer-facing staff. The program focused not just on what employees should do, but on why dignity was central to Pinnacle's mission. "These changes are not suggestions or guidelines," Alexander emphasized. "They are the new operational reality of Pinnacle Airways. Those who cannot embrace them should seek employment elsewhere." From the back of the room, a veteran station manager raised his hand. "Mr. Brooks, with all due respect, these changes will significantly impact our efficiency metrics. Flight delays will increase if we need to document and justify every seating adjustment." Alexander nodded. "You're right, John. Efficiency may suffer in the short term, but I'd rather explain to shareholders why our flights are occasionally 5 minutes late than explain to our customers why their dignity isn't worth those 5 minutes." The room fell silent as the paradigm shift sank in. As promised, the financial impact had been significant. Pinnacle's stock had dropped nearly 14% in the 2 weeks following the incident. Class action lawsuits had been filed. Regulatory investigations had begun. The board had been restructured with 3 members resigning and 2 new members with civil rights backgrounds appointed. Yet amid this turmoil, something unexpected was emerging, a sense of renewed purpose among employees. The day after the incident, resignation letters had poured in from staff who disagreed with the new direction. But they had been outnumbered 5-1 by applications from people eager to join a company that had chosen integrity over expediency. After the management meeting, Alexander met with Sofia and her team to review the initial feedback from the training rollout. "We're getting strong engagement," Sofia reported, "but there's resistance from some of the longer-tenured staff. They keep saying, 'This isn't how the industry works.'" Alexander smiled slightly. "They're right. It isn't how the industry works. That's precisely the point." Sofia nodded, understanding completely. "We've adjusted the training to address this. Instead of just telling them what to do differently, we're having them imagine being the passenger who's humiliated, or having their parent or child be that passenger." Good, Alexander approved. Empathy is more powerful than policy. The meeting shifted to reviewing specific incidents and how they would be handled under the new protocols. Each scenario was analyzed not just for procedural correctness, but for its impact on passenger dignity. A particularly challenging case involved a premium passenger who had explicitly requested not to be seated next to certain types of people. Under the old system, such requests would have been quietly accommodated through rebalancing. Now the response was clear. Such requests would be politely but firmly declined as contrary to company values. "What if they threaten to take their business elsewhere?" asked Marcus Johnson, the HR chief who had initially questioned Alexander's approach but was now fully committed to the transformation. "Then they should," Alexander replied simply. "We cannot build an ethical airline by accommodating unethical requests." Meanwhile, across town in a luxury downtown office, James Sullivan sat across from his attorney reviewing the termination agreement Pinnacle had offered. "This is actually quite generous given the circumstances," the attorney advised. "Full vesting of your equity, 6-month severance, and most importantly, no admission of personal wrongdoing required for the settlement." Sullivan scowled. "Brooks is grandstanding. Every airline does demographic balancing. He's destroying shareholder value to play social justice warrior." The attorney sighed. "James, I need you to understand something. I've reviewed the evidence they provided. This went far beyond demographic balancing. The directives you issued, the incentives you created, they constituted illegal discrimination. You're fortunate they're offering settlement terms at all." "The board approved the metrics," Sullivan insisted. Without understanding their implementation, the attorney countered, "And the paper trail makes that distinction very clear." Sullivan's expression hardened. "I built that airline alongside Brooks. 15 years of my life. And he throws me under the bus for one misinterpreted policy. It wasn't misinterpreted, James. The emails are explicit." Sullivan fell silent, the reality of his situation finally beginning to penetrate his denial. His reputation was in tatters. His career in aviation was effectively over. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. The attorney closed the folder. "Sign the agreement, take the settlement, and perhaps consider that Brooks might be right about some things." Sullivan stared out the window at the Chicago skyline where Pinnacle's corporate headquarters stood prominently. The airline had been his life's work too, second only to Alexander's in terms of time and energy invested. But somewhere along the way, their visions had diverged fundamentally. For Sullivan, the airline was ultimately a business. Numbers on spreadsheets, metrics to optimize, shareholder value to maximize. For Alexander, it had always been something more, a manifestation of values, a vehicle for dignity, a proving ground for a different way of doing business. Back at Pinnacle headquarters, the transformation continued at a relentless pace. In the customer service center, representatives were being trained on a new compensation protocol for affected passengers. In IT, developers were rebuilding the reservation system with equity safeguards. In marketing, a completely new campaign was taking shape, one focused on dignity rather than luxury. Alexander stood in the operations center watching flights move across the global tracking display. Each aircraft icon represented hundreds of passengers experiencing the reimagined Pinnacle service model. Mia approached with the latest figures. Passenger satisfaction ratings are up 12 points overall. More significantly, the gap between demographic groups has narrowed to less than 2 points. Alexander nodded, pleased but not satisfied. And employee engagement. That's the most surprising metric, Mia reported. Despite the disruption and increased workload, employee satisfaction has increased by 17 points. Exit interviews with departing staff show they're leaving because they disagree with the changes. The ones who remain are increasingly passionate about our mission. Alexander gazed at the flight paths crisscrossing the screen. A self-selecting culture. That's exactly what we need. The transformation faced significant challenges. Most difficult was balancing the need for consistent dignity with the reality of premium amenities. Early feedback revealed confusion among some staff who interpreted the new approach as requiring identical service for all passengers. Alexander addressed this directly in a company-wide message. Dignity doesn't mean sameness. First-class passengers should receive the enhanced amenities they've paid for. What they should not receive is enhanced humanity or respect. The material experience can be tiered. The human experience must be equal. 4 weeks after Flight 673, Alexander received an unexpected visitor, Thomas Blackwell, the businessman who had taken his seat on the fateful flight. The meeting had been requested through formal channels, and Alexander had hesitated before agreeing to it. Blackwell entered Alexander's office looking markedly different from the arrogant figure on the aircraft, humbled, almost uncertain. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Brooks," he began. "I doubt I'd have granted this meeting if our positions were reversed." Alexander gestured to a chair. "What can I do for you, Mr. Blackwell?" Blackwell sat clearly uncomfortable. "I've spent the past month reflecting on my behavior that day. I've never thought of myself as prejudiced. I donate to worthy causes. I mentor young professionals of all backgrounds." He paused, struggling visibly. "Yet when that flight attendant offered me your seat because you didn't match the premium profile, I didn't question it. I accepted it as natural as right." Alexander remained silent, allowing Blackwell to continue his painful self-examination. "My company has implemented your dignity protocols in our customer service operations," Blackwell continued. "The process has been illuminating. We discovered patterns we hadn't recognized before." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not here for absolution, Mr. Brooks. What I did was wrong. I'm here because I want to understand how to make substantive change rather than performative gestures." Alexander studied him for a moment, weighing the sincerity of this apparent transformation. "The fact that you're asking that question suggests you've already begun the most important change, recognizing that this isn't about policies, but about perspectives." Their conversation extended far longer than the scheduled 15 minutes, delving into the subtle ways privilege perpetuated itself and how systems could be restructured to promote equity. By the end, an unexpected alliance had formed. Blackwell's investment firm would become one of the first corporate partners in Pinnacle's Dignity Initiative, a program extending these principles beyond the airline industry. 6 weeks after Flight 673, the transformation of Pinnacle Airways continued to face both successes and setbacks. Lawsuits were proceeding. Regulatory investigations expanded. Some premium customers canceled their loyalty memberships in protest. Yet, surprising indicators of success were emerging. Bookings had initially dropped but were now rebounding, particularly among passengers of color who had previously avoided air travel due to concerns about discriminatory treatment. Social media sentiment, initially mixed, had shifted decidedly positive. Most significantly, corporate clients began preferentially booking with Pinnacle, influenced by their own diversity commitments. For Alexander Brooks, watching his company's aircraft traverse the globe, the painful incident had evolved into something he had never anticipated: a gift. A chance to rebuild Pinnacle Airways, not just as a successful business, but as the embodiment of its founding vision, where every passenger's journey included the one amenity that should never have been considered premium: their uncompromised dignity. The autumn sun cast long shadows across O'Hare International Airport as Pinnacle Airways Flight 673, the same flight number deliberately preserved, prepared for its journey from Chicago to Newark. At Gate B17, passengers of diverse backgrounds moved through the boarding process with the typical mix of travel weariness and anticipation. What wasn't typical was the boarding procedure itself. Instead of the traditional hierarchy, first class, then elite status holders, then everyone else. Pinnacle now boarded by practical needs. Families with small children, elderly passengers, and those requiring assistance entered first, regardless of ticket class. Then, starting from the back of the aircraft rows, were called in an orderly sequence. Alexander Brooks stood to the side, observing the process with quiet satisfaction. 6 months after the watershed moment that had transformed Pinnacle Airways, he was conducting one of his regular dignity audits, unannounced visits to experience the customer journey firsthand. Sofia Rodriguez approached, now carrying herself with the confidence of her leadership position. "They don't recognize you with the beard," she noted with amusement, referencing the subtle disguise Alexander had adopted for these visits. "That's the point," he replied. "I want to see how we treat ordinary passengers, not how we treat the CEO." The transformation of Pinnacle Airways over the past 6 months had been comprehensive and, to industry observers, astonishing. The dignity-first operating model had completely reimagined the airline experience from reservation to arrival. The most visible change was in the aircraft cabins themselves. While Pinnacle still offered first class with its traditional amenities, the physical and psychological barriers between cabins had been deliberately minimized. The harsh curtain dividers were replaced with subtle artistic transitions. Lighting schemes created a unified ambiance throughout the aircraft. Flight attendants rotated between cabins rather than being assigned to serve only premium or economy passengers. "How are the metrics looking?" Alexander asked as they watched the boarding process. "Fascinating," Sofia replied. On-time performance initially dropped by 6% as we implemented the new protocols. Now it's 4 points higher than our pre-change baseline. Turns out boarding by practical need rather than status is actually more efficient." She continued with evident pride. "Customer satisfaction is up across all demographics. Most tellingly, the satisfaction gap between cabins has narrowed to less than 3 points. Economy passengers no longer feel like second-class citizens." Alexander nodded, pleased but not surprised. "And financially?" Here Sofia's expression became more complex. "That's where we're still facing challenges. After the initial 12% stock drop, we've recovered about half. Revenue is up 3% year over year, not the 9% we initially projected." "The dignity dividend hasn't fully materialized," Alexander observed. "Not yet," Sofia agreed. "But we're seeing encouraging trends. Corporate bookings are up 17% as companies align with our values. First-time flyers people who previously avoided air travel are up 22%, and our customer loyalty metrics are stronger than ever." The industry had initially scoffed at Pinnacle's transformation, predicting financial disaster. Competitors had gleefully anticipated capturing Pinnacle's premium customers, who would surely flee from an airline that didn't cater to their sense of exclusivity. The reality had been more nuanced. Some premium customers did leave, particularly those who had valued the psychological separation more than the physical amenities. But their departures were partially offset by new passengers attracted to Pinnacle's refreshed brand. The true financial challenge had come from unexpected quarters. Several major corporate clients, while publicly supporting Pinnacle's stance, had privately negotiated for steeper discounts, leveraging the airline's temporary vulnerability. And the legal settlements from the discrimination lawsuits had exceeded even the most pessimistic projections. The board meeting tomorrow will be challenging. Sofia noted. Harrison and Peters are still pushing for a modified approach that would preserve the dignity focus while reintroducing premium environments. Alexander recognized the euphemism immediately. They want to bring back demographic curation without calling it that. Exactly, Sofia confirmed. They're pointing to Flightcrest Airways' financial performance as proof that traditional premium service still has market demand. Flightcrest, Pinnacle's most direct competitor, had opportunistically positioned itself as the airline for travelers who preferred classic luxury service, a thin veil for the very practices Pinnacle had abandoned. As Flight 673 completed its boarding process, Alexander and Sofia moved to the adjacent gate, where the next test of Pinnacle's transformation was about to unfold. Flight 127 to San Francisco was experiencing a 2-hour mechanical delay, precisely the kind of situation that historically brought out the worst in airline customer service. The gate agent, unaware of Alexander's identity, was addressing the waiting passengers with remarkable transparency. "We have a hydraulic system issue that our maintenance team is addressing. While they work, I want to be completely clear about your options." She proceeded to outline the available choices waiting for the repair rebooking on later flights or rebooking with partner airlines with equal emphasis, regardless of passenger status. The compensation offered was identical across fare classes, a radical departure from industry norms. Most striking was what didn't happen. There was no preferential treatment whispered to elite passengers. No one was taken aside for special accommodations, while others waited in ignorance. The dignity of complete information was extended to everyone. "Impressive," Alexander murmured to Sofia. 6 months ago, we'd have had elite services discreetly pulling high-status passengers aside while everyone else received minimal information. Sofia nodded. Angela was actually part of the problem before. She was one of Veronica's protégés trained to prioritize premium demographic satisfaction above all. Now she's one of our strongest dignity advocates. As they observed the gate operations, Alexander's phone vibrated with a news alert. He checked it and passed the phone to Sofia with a grim smile. The headline read, "Former Pinnacle COO Sullivan joins Federal Aviation workforce as diversity consultant." Sofia's eyebrows shot up. "Is this a joke?" "Apparently not." Alexander replied. After 6 months of failed attempts to get back into airline executive ranks, he's had what he calls a profound realization about the importance of inclusive practices. Do you believe him? Alexander considered the question carefully. "I believe in the possibility of genuine change. Whether that's what's happening with Sullivan, I can't say. But I'd rather live in a world where redemption is possible than one where it isn't." As they continued their observation of Pinnacle's operations, the broader impact of Flight 673's legacy became evident everywhere. Employee uniforms now included a small silver pin shaped like an aircraft with the word dignity inscribed beneath it. Signage throughout the terminal emphasized respect and inclusion. Most tellingly, the demographic composition of Pinnacle's staff at all levels had begun to better reflect the diversity of its passengers. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. The initial weeks had seen resistance from long-tenured employees accustomed to traditional airline hierarchies. Some had left unable or unwilling to adapt to the new culture. Legal battles continued with regulatory bodies and through class action lawsuits, though many had been settled. The most significant struggle had been changing deep-seated passenger expectations. Some premium customers initially interpreted the dignity-first approach as a diminishment of their status. Others tested boundaries, expecting preferential treatment despite the new policies. "What's been the most surprising outcome for you?" Alexander asked Sofia as they prepared to board Flight 673. Sofia thought for a moment. "The letters. We've received over 12,000 personal messages from passengers sharing their experiences of discrimination before our changes and their relief at flying with dignity now. Some are heartbreaking people who spent extra money they couldn't afford on premium tickets just to avoid being treated poorly." Alexander nodded, familiar with the phenomenon. And from the crew perspective, the psychological burden lifted from our staff has been profound, Sofia explained. Many have told me they used to go home feeling complicit in something wrong. Now they take pride in how they treat every passenger. As they boarded Flight 673, Alexander deliberately used his regular boarding position rather than his CEO privilege. Taking seat 17C in economy, he experienced the transformed Pinnacle service model firsthand. The flight attendant greeting passengers showed the same genuine warmth to everyone regardless of cabin. The safety briefing included a brief statement about Pinnacle's commitment to respectful treatment. Most notably, the in-flight service, while still differentiated by cabin features, maintained equal attentiveness and courtesy throughout the aircraft. Midway through the flight, Alexander observed a potentially problematic situation developing. A white businessman in first class was becoming increasingly demanding his requests, taking on the tone of entitlement rather than requests. I specifically asked for the Chardonnay, not this. Whatever this is, he complained loudly, holding up his wine glass with theatrical disdain. The flight attendant, a young black man named Marcus, responded with perfect composure. I apologize for the mix-up, sir. That's our Pinot Grigio. I'll bring you the Chardonnay immediately. As Marcus turned away, the passenger muttered just loudly enough to be heard. This wouldn't have happened in the old Pinnacle. Marcus paused for a fraction of a second, then continued his duties. When he returned with the correct wine, his courtesy remained impeccable. But Alexander, watching closely, noticed the subtle tightening around his eyes, the small but unmistakable sign of someone absorbing an emotional blow while maintaining professional composure. After the service concluded, Alexander approached Marcus in the galley. That was a challenging interaction he observed quietly. Marcus looked up, not immediately recognizing Alexander with his beard. Just part of the job, sir. It shouldn't be, Alexander replied. That passenger was testing boundaries, seeing if he could provoke preferential treatment or special deference. Recognition dawned in Marcus's eyes. Mr. Brooks? Alexander nodded. How often does that happen? Marcus considered the question thoughtfully. Less than before. But some passengers, especially long-time premium customers, still expect the old hierarchy. When they don't get it, some test how far they can push. And how do you handle it? I remember what Ms. Rodriguez taught us in training. Their behavior reflects on them, not on you. Your response reflects on Pinnacle. So I maintain the standard of service while refusing to accept disrespect. Alexander nodded appreciatively. Perfectly balanced. Thank you for exemplifying what Pinnacle should be. As the plane began its descent into Newark, Alexander reflected on the 6-month transformation journey. Pinnacle Airways had been profoundly changed, not just in policies or procedures, but in its fundamental understanding of what service meant. The financial transformation remained incomplete, the full dignity dividend still emerging. But the human transformation was undeniable and irreversible. The aircraft touched down smoothly in Newark. As passengers prepared to disembark, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Newark Liberty International Airport. On behalf of all of us at Pinnacle Airways, thank you for allowing us to serve you with dignity today. We look forward to welcoming you aboard again soon. Simple words, but ones that carried the weight of a promise kept. The grand ballroom of the Chicago Marriott downtown glittered with subdued elegance. Above the stage, a simple banner read, Dignity First, 1 year of transformation. The audience of 500 included Pinnacle Airways employees from every level and department industry representatives, media figures, and most significantly, passengers, ordinary people whose experiences had shaped the company's remarkable journey. Alexander Brooks stood at the podium no longer in casual attire, but in a tailored suit that signified the formality of the occasion. The past year had visibly affected him. Subtle silver threads now appeared at his temples, testament to the intense pressure of leading such a profound transformation. 1 year ago today, he began, I boarded Flight 673 as an anonymous passenger and was removed from my seat because I didn't look like someone who belonged in first class. That moment of humiliation could have remained a private indignity, one of thousands that occur daily in our society. Instead, it became a catalyst for questioning not just who belongs in a premium cabin, but the very nature of how we define belonging itself. The room was silent, hundreds of guests absorbing the significance of this anniversary. The easy path would have been performative outrage followed by minimal adjustments, perhaps a strongly worded memo sensitivity training and a few strategic terminations. The airline industry would have nodded in solemn agreement, then continued business as usual. Alexander's gaze swept across the room, making eye contact with employees who had been part of this journey from the beginning. Instead, we chose the harder path, fundamental transformation. We asked ourselves difficult questions. Why do we separate passengers at all? Who benefits from hierarchy in the skies? Can we preserve premium experiences without compromising human dignity? He gestured toward a wall where photographs chronicled the year's journey. Images of revised cabin designs, new training programs, community outreach initiatives, and most powerfully portraits of passengers whose stories had informed the changes. The numbers tell one version of our story. Alexander continued. Passenger satisfaction up 23%. Employee retention improved 15%. Revenue increased 7% despite industry analysts predicting our collapse. He paused, his expression becoming more somber. But I won't pretend the journey has been without significant challenges. Our stock remains 8% below pre-transformation levels. Legal settlements have exceeded projections. Some long-time customers have departed for competitors who still offer what we will not the comfort of demographic homogeneity disguised as traditional premium service. This candid acknowledgement of the financial realities drew murmurs from the audience. Alexander had been criticized by some board members for being too transparent about Pinnacle's struggles. Yet, even facing these challenges, I wouldn't change our course. Because metrics don't capture what truly matters. They don't measure the grandmother who no longer clutches her boarding pass in anxiety, wondering if she'll be treated with respect. They don't quantify the relief of parents whose children will grow up seeing diversity in every cabin. They don't calculate the psychological burden lifted from crew members who no longer must enforce arbitrary hierarchies. Alexander stepped away from the podium, moving to the center of the stage to speak more directly. Today, we're not just celebrating Pinnacle Airways transformation. We're acknowledging something more profound that institutions can change when they confront uncomfortable truths. That profitable businesses need not sacrifice human dignity at the altar of shareholder value. That meaningful transformation requires not just new policies, but new perspectives. He gestured toward Sofia Rodriguez, seated in the front row. I'd like to invite our Director of Service Culture and Training, Sofia Rodriguez, to join me. Sofia ascended the stage to warm applause. Her transformation over the year had been as remarkable as the airlines, from a hesitant flight attendant afraid to speak up to a confident leader whose training programs were now being studied by business schools. Sofia doesn't know this, Alexander said, but today she's receiving a new title, Senior Vice President of Dignity Experience. Her vision has been instrumental in reimagining what air travel can and should be. Sofia's surprise was evident, her composure momentarily shaken by the unexpected promotion. As she accepted the announcement with gracious thanks, the audience's applause reflected genuine appreciation for her contributions. Alexander continued the program by introducing a series of speakers who represented different aspects of the transformation: crew members, passengers, even former critics who had become advocates. Each shared personal testimonials about the impact of the Dignity First approach. Dr. Elijah Taylor, now heading Pinnacle's Independent Ethics Advisory Board, spoke about the academic research documenting the transformation's effects. What Pinnacle Airways has demonstrated isn't just a corporate turnaround story, he noted. It's empirical evidence that ethical leadership and financial performance aren't opposing forces, they're complementary strengths. The most powerful moment came when an elderly black woman took the stage. her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the microphone. "My name is Eleanor Washington," she began. "I've been flying since 1962. For most of those years I dressed formally for flights, spoke carefully, and kept my requests minimal, all to avoid being treated as if I didn't belong." The room grew utterly silent. "Last month I flew Pinnacle Airways for the first time in my casual clothes jeans and a sweater. I was seated in first class, not because of some special status, but because my daughter had bought the ticket as a gift. The young man next to me was also black, wearing a hoodie and headphones. Neither of us was treated with suspicion or disdain. We were simply passengers deserving of respect." Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. "You young folks might not understand what that means to someone of my generation, but I flew home and called everyone I know. I told them, something has changed in the world. Not everywhere, not completely, but somewhere it has changed." There wasn't a dry eye in the ballroom as Eleanor returned to her seat. Following this emotional testimony, a more challenging moment arrived. William Fletcher, the board member who had most consistently opposed the transformation approach, had requested time to speak. Alexander had insisted on including him despite staff concerns. Fletcher approached the podium, his expression professionally neutral. "As the designated financial pessimist on Pinnacle's board, I've spent a year questioning whether we could afford to prioritize dignity over traditional metrics. I've advocated repeatedly for what I called reasonable compromises to improve our financial position." He paused, glancing at Alexander. "I was wrong." A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Last quarter's results confirmed what Mr. Brooks insisted all along, that dignity isn't just morally right, but financially sustainable. Our customer acquisition costs have decreased 40%. Our Net Promoter Score leads the industry by 17 points. And most tellingly, our revenue per available seat mile now exceeds pre-transformation levels. Fletcher turned directly to Alexander. "I opposed your vision, questioned your judgment, and doubted your financial acumen. Today, I publicly acknowledge that you saw what the rest of us couldn't, that dignity and profitability aren't opposing forces, but reinforcing values." The spontaneous applause that followed reflected more than approval of Fletcher's words. It signified the turning point Pinnacle had finally reached, where the financial case for dignity-centered business had become undeniable. The formal program concluded with the unveiling of Pinnacle's next initiative. The Dignity Institute, an independent organization funded by the airline but operating autonomously to promote inclusive practices across all service industries. The Dignity Institute will conduct research, develop training resources, and provide certification for organizations committed to equitable service, Alexander explained. Its founding principle is simple. Dignity is not a premium amenity, it is a universal human right. As the formal ceremony transitioned to a reception industry, competitors mingled with Pinnacle employees, many clearly assessing how to respond to the airline's successful transformation. Some had already begun implementing similar changes, though often in watered-down forms that preserved traditional hierarchies. In a quiet corner of the ballroom, Alexander found himself face-to-face with Thomas Blackwell, the businessman who had taken his seat on Flight 673 a year earlier. Their initial confrontational meeting 6 months ago had evolved into an unexpected alliance, with Blackwell's investment firm becoming one of the first to adopt Pinnacle's dignity protocols in their client services. "Quite a year," Blackwell commented, sipping sparkling water rather than champagne. Indeed, Alexander agreed. "Your company's implementation of the dignity protocols has been impressive. Genuine, not performative." Blackwell nodded thoughtfully. "It's been illuminating. Uncomfortable at times, but necessary. Our client satisfaction is up, particularly among those who historically felt marginalized in financial services." He hesitated, then added, "I've been meaning to say something to you, Alexander. Not as business associates, but as one human to another. I am truly sorry for my behavior that day on the plane. I've spent a year examining how easily I accepted preferential treatment at another's expense." Alexander studied him, recognizing the genuine nature of this apology. Transformation isn't just organizational, Thomas. It's personal. Your willingness to change may ultimately be more meaningful than mine. I had direct incentive. You could have simply dismissed the experience. From across the room, Alexander spotted a familiar figure entering the ballroom. James Sullivan, his former COO and the architect of the discriminatory policies that had precipitated the transformation. His presence caused an immediate stir, conversations pausing as recognition spread. Sullivan moved deliberately toward Alexander, his expression unreadable. The room's atmosphere shifted from celebration to tension as the former colleagues faced each other for the first time since Sullivan's termination. Alexander Sullivan greeted him, extending his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Alexander accepted the handshake. "James, this is unexpected. I wasn't sure I'd make it past security," Sullivan acknowledged with a hint of his old confidence. "But I thought it important to be here today." Why, Sullivan surveyed the room, taking in the transformation that had occurred in his absence. "To see if what I've been hearing is true, that you actually made it work. That the dignity approach didn't sink the airline as I predicted." "We're still standing," Alexander confirmed, though not without struggle. "So I've read." Sullivan nodded. "Your quarterly reports make interesting reading. The financial recovery took longer than you projected." "It did," Alexander acknowledged. "The true cost of discrimination runs deeper than most balance sheets can capture." Sullivan's expression shifted subtly. "I've been doing some reflection over the past year. My federal consulting role has forced me to confront perspectives I previously dismissed. And I'm not here to apologize or seek redemption," Sullivan stated flatly. "What I did made business sense within the framework I operated in. But I'm beginning to understand that framework itself was fundamentally flawed." Alexander studied his former colleague carefully. "That's a start." Perhaps Sullivan conceded. "But I didn't come to make amends. I came to understand how you've made it work, the dignity model, without financial collapse. The numbers suggest you've cracked a code I didn't believe existed." "No code," Alexander replied. "Just the recognition that human dignity and business success aren't opposing forces when your business model genuinely values both." As their conversation concluded and Sullivan departed, Sofia approached with news that CNN was requesting an interview with Alexander about the Dignity Institute. The one-year anniversary event continued late into the evening, evolving from formal ceremony to genuine celebration. Throughout the ballroom, stories were shared, connections made, and commitments renewed. What had begun as one airline's crisis response had blossomed into a movement that now extended far beyond Pinnacle Airways. In his closing remarks, standing among employees and passengers rather than above them on stage, Alexander captured the essence of the year's journey. Dignity isn't a destination we reach once and claim victory. It's a daily practice, a continuous commitment to seeing the humanity in every person we serve and work alongside. Today, we celebrate 1 year of that practice, but our true measure will be the decades to come. Each passenger, each flight, each interaction an opportunity to affirm that in the skies and on the ground, everyone belongs. As the event concluded, attendees departed with a small memento, a crystal paperweight containing a single aircraft seat in miniature. Etched on its base were the words that had become Pinnacle's guiding principle: dignity first, always. 24 months to the day after Flight 673, Alexander Brooks sat alone in Seat 1A on the identical Chicago to Newark route. The symbolism was deliberate, a personal pilgrimage to mark the completion of Pinnacle Airways' 2-year transformation journey. The first-class cabin around him bore little resemblance to the space where he had experienced humiliation 2 years earlier. The physical changes were subtle but meaningful. The harsh boundary between cabins replaced by a gradual transition of design elements, the lighting programmed to create unity rather than separation, the crew stations positioned to serve all passengers with equal accessibility. More profound than the physical changes was the atmospheric transformation. Passengers moved between cabins freely. Crew members engaged with everyone, similarly regardless of seating assignment, and the underlying current of status anxiety that had once permeated the aircraft was noticeably absent. As the boarding process concluded, Sofia Rodriguez, now an executive but still occasionally working flights to maintain connection with frontline experiences, approached Alexander's seat. "Comfortable, Mr. Brooks?" she asked with a smile that acknowledged the moment's significance. "Very," he replied, "though I'm more interested in how our other passengers are feeling." Sofia's expression reflected justified pride. The latest real-time satisfaction metrics are remarkable. Overall rating 4.8 out of 5 across all cabins. Most tellingly, the gap between economy and first-class satisfaction has narrowed to just 0.3 points. Alexander nodded appreciatively. And crew satisfaction even higher, 4.9 out of 5. The psychological burden of enforcing arbitrary hierarchies has been lifted. They report feeling like genuine service professionals rather than status gatekeepers. As Sofia moved on to complete her pre-flight duties, Alexander observed the cabin with quiet satisfaction. 2 years of methodical transformation had created something unprecedented in commercial aviation. An environment where premium amenities existed without premium entitlement, where service quality remained consistent, regardless of ticket price, where human dignity had become the defining feature of the Pinnacle experience. The financial outcomes had surprised even the most optimistic projections. After the initial stock decline, Pinnacle had experienced 8 consecutive quarters of growth, outperforming the industry average by substantial margins. Premium cabin revenue increased, despite industry predictions that democratizing the experience would drive high-value customers away. Most surprisingly, economy bookings had surged, particularly among demographics historically underrepresented in air travel. Beyond metrics, the cultural impact within Pinnacle had been profound. Employee applications had increased 5-fold, with candidates specifically citing the dignity-first culture as their primary attraction. Turnover rates dropped to industry-leading lows. The company's internal culture had transformed from traditional hierarchy to collaborative community, a change reflected in everything from office design to communication protocols. As Flight 673 reached cruising altitude, Alexander's thoughts turned to the journey's beginning that moment 2 years ago when Veronica Palmer had demanded he surrender his rightful seat. The humiliation had been genuine, the anger justified. Yet what followed had transcended personal vindication to become institutional transformation. His reflection was interrupted by a notification on his tablet, the final report from the independent audit committee that had overseen Pinnacle's 2-year transformation process. He opened it eagerly, scanning for the conclusion. After comprehensive review of all operational, financial, and experiential metrics, the committee confirms that Pinnacle Airways has successfully completed its dignity-first transformation. All 142 recommended changes have been fully implemented and validated through independent assessment. The committee formally recognizes Pinnacle Airways as the industry's first fully certified dignity enterprise. Alexander closed the report, a sense of completion washing over him. The 2-year journey, intense, challenging, occasionally painful, had reached its formal conclusion. As if marking the moment, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Michael Reynolds. We've reached our cruising altitude of 33,000 feet. Weather in Newark looks clear and we'll be arriving right on schedule. On behalf of everyone at Pinnacle Airways, thank you for allowing us to serve you with dignity today." The simple phrase, "serve you with dignity," had become Pinnacle's signature, incorporated into every announcement on every flight. What had once seemed revolutionary now felt natural, necessary right. As the service began, Alexander observed an elderly black woman being assisted by a flight attendant in economy. The interaction was unhurried, respectful, attentive, identical to the service being provided in first class. 2 years ago, such a passenger might have waited while premium cabins received priority attention. Now, dignity dictated universal standards of care, regardless of ticket price. Midway through the flight, Alexander left his first-class seat and walked through the aircraft, observing the transformed Pinnacle experience from multiple perspectives. In economy, the seats remained narrower and the amenities fewer, but the human experience, the core of dignified service, was indistinguishable from first class. Near the rear of the aircraft, he noticed a young black professional in casual clothing working on a laptop. Something in the man's focused expression reminded Alexander of himself 20 years earlier. Ambitious, determined, perhaps not yet fully confident in claiming space in environments historically designed to exclude. Alexander paused beside his seat. "Excuse me, is the Wi-Fi working well for you?" The young man looked up initially, not recognizing Alexander despite his prominence in company communications. "Yes, it's excellent. Far better than other airlines I've flown." "Glad to hear it," Alexander replied with a smile. "Enjoy your flight." It was a small interaction, barely 30 seconds long, yet it encapsulated everything the transformation had sought to achieve. A world where that young professional would never question his belonging, would never feel the sting of arbitrary exclusion, would never have to justify his presence in any space he had rightfully earned. Returning to his seat, Alexander found a handwritten note from Sofia. 2 years ago today, I slipped you a napkin with information about discrimination happening on this airline. I was terrified but determined. Today, I'm proud beyond words of what we've built together. Dignity isn't just what we provide, it's who we are. As Flight 673 began its descent into Newark, Alexander gazed out the window at the landscape below. Cities and towns stretched to the horizon, filled with millions of daily interactions, where human dignity was either honored or compromised. What had begun as one airline's transformation had expanded into a movement influencing industries far beyond aviation. The Dignity Institute now worked with over 500 companies across 42 industries, from healthcare to hospitality, retail to transportation. Business schools taught the Pinnacle case study as a core ethics component. Most significantly, consumers had begun explicitly seeking dignity-certified businesses, creating market pressure for equitable treatment. The aircraft touched down smoothly on Newark's runway. As passengers prepared to disembark, Alexander remained seated, allowing others to exit first, another small but significant departure from traditional executive privilege. When he finally rose to leave, Captain Reynolds had emerged from the cockpit to personally greet deplaning passengers. The two men shook hands warmly. 2 years ago today, Reynolds said quietly. "Never imagined where we'd end up." "Neither did I," Alexander acknowledged. "But I'm grateful for the journey, challenges, and all." Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I was talking with my daughter yesterday. She's studying business at Michigan. They're using Pinnacle as a case study in her ethics class. She's proud her dad is part of this." This perhaps was the most meaningful measure of transformation, not metrics or awards, but the quiet pride of people connected to a company that had chosen to stand for something greater than profit alone. As Alexander walked through Newark Liberty International Airport, he noticed a young family being assisted by a Pinnacle customer service representative. The interaction exemplified everything the transformation had sought to achieve: attentive service, provided with equal respect regardless of the family's appearance status or cabin class. In that ordinary moment, one of thousands occurring across Pinnacle's network every day, the full circle was complete. What began with one passenger's humiliation had evolved into countless experiences of genuine dignity. For Alexander Brooks, watching that simple, respectful interaction, the journey had transcended corporate transformation to become something far more meaningful. Proof that institutions could change, that business could be both profitable and principled, and that dignity, once established as a foundational value, could transform not just a company, but the very experience of being human in spaces we share. The true legacy of Flight 673 wasn't just a reformed airline. It was a reimagined possibility of what business could be when it centered the simple revolutionary principle that every person deserves to be treated with equal dignity, not as a premium amenity, but as an unalienable right. If this story touched your heart, please consider supporting our channel by liking this video and subscribing for more inspiring content. Your support helps us share powerful stories like Alexander's journey with a wider audience. Remember, dignity isn't something that should be earned or purchased. It's a fundamental human right that belongs to all of us. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today.